July 7th, 1987. Crystal River, Florida. It's about 1:35 a.m. Crystal River Police Department's officer, Kat Leota, and her then-boyfriend Tim were roused from sleep by banging at their door. Leota had just arrived home about midnight that night, an hour and a half earlier. When she opened the door, she saw David Cote. Odd, she thought, because she had just given him a ride home earlier that night. He was a local, and she'd given him rides before, so that night, when she saw him walking in the dark, hitchhiking, she offered him a ride. He lived not far from her in a van on his brother's property. David told her he'd just come from a bar called the Tangerine. She noticed that he was off balance getting into her vehicle, and he smelled of alcohol. She drove the short distance home and then let David off at the end of her driveway so he could walk the rest of the way home. But now it's just after 1:30 a.m., and he's back at her home standing in front of her about an hour and a half later.
"There's a lady and she's dead."
Leota was skeptical, given he had been drinking. "Where? Are you sure?" David Cote told her he had flagged down a passing vehicle and told the driver that there was a dead woman. That driver brought him here. Leota looked past him to the vehicle that was idling in her driveway in the dark behind him, a red convertible. David told Officer Leota that after she dropped him off that night, he started to walk home, but he changed his mind, and he decided to go to the victim's house for a beer. At midnight, mind you. That seems relevant. After he found the victim dead, Cote said he'd gone across the street to the house of Goldie Locke and banged on her door, but nobody answered. He told Leota that he knew that the woman was dead because there was blood all over the place, and he had felt her rib cage and she was cold. Officer Leota quickly called Crystal River Sheriff's Office, and while they waited for first responders to arrive, she said David told her he had gone to the victim's house, the door was unlocked, and so he went in. Officer Leota's boyfriend Tim asked who David thought could have done such a thing, and he said Virginia Lee Lawson, this woman in her 60s, carried money in a pouch in her bra or her pants. He sprinkled in other details like the fact that he had argued previously with this friend, although he was not specific at that time when this argument occurred or what it was about. During this discussion, David asked Officer Kat Leota's boyfriend Tim to go outside and tell the man who had given him a ride that he could leave. So Tim went outside and he spoke to the man in the red convertible. He took a bit of general information and then he told him that he could go. Police would speak to him later. When Tim returned inside, David had asked Officer Leota for a cup of coffee, so Tim began brewing one for him. He asked David,
"Did she have any money?"
And David repeated that Virginia always carried money in her bra and pants and that very few people knew that. Officer Paget responded with EMS to Leota's house, and then Leota instructed David to ride with Tim and give him directions, and then she jumped into the vehicle with Officer Paget. The ride was only about 4/10 of a mile down that rural road, and they all arrived at 4485 North Elm together. Officer Paget entered the home while Leota stood at the door, not wanting any more people to disturb the crime scene. Here's what Officer Paget described seeing.
"I observed a white female body slumped face down, partially on the floor and partially on the couch. I approached the body and saw what I assumed to be blood on the couch surrounding the head of the body. 2 marks that looked to be stab wounds were evident on the woman's back. The woman was semi-nude with articles of clothing in disarray, pulled up to her neck and down to her knees."
When Paget stepped back outside, he learned from Officer Leota that David Cote had discovered the body and had come to her house for assistance. Paget then approached David Cote and asked him to extend his hands. He noted that they were exceptionally clean, except for a patch of reddish-brown crusted matter on the back of his right hand where the thumb joined the hand, which he suspected to be blood. He noted that David was otherwise very dirty and disheveled, except for those very clean hands. Tim recalled hearing David Cote say at this point,
"I want you all to know that I have killed before. It was 20 years ago, in self-defense.
David told the officers that he found the body and he touched her rib cage, and then he went to Goldie's house to use the phone, but she didn't answer. Officer Paget asked where the blood on his hands came from, and David said he got it when he touched the body. Paget said, "Well, how did you get blood on the back of your hand?" And David said, "I don't know." Paget asked him,
"Why didn't you use the phone at the victim's house to call the police?"
And he said because he didn't want to touch it. Then he was asked to show the officers where he lived. So he directed them to an old Ford van on a Florida Power right-of-way behind his brother Leo Cote's house. This was about a half a mile from Virginia's house. And now it's about 4 a.m. at this point, and David Cote signs a consent to search his van, which they did. And pretty quickly they noticed a pair of dark blue pants on top of some other clothing that appeared to be bloodstained. They had him outside, and he advised them that there was a 16-gauge shotgun with no stock in the van, which was confiscated along with 4 articles of clothing, 2 stained shirts, and a blue shirt and blue pants described as heavily bloodstained. By 5 a.m. they had run a criminal history, gotten Leota and her boyfriend Tim's statements about their interactions with him, and learned that he was wanted for violation of probation and had served 2 years and 3 months for a homicide conviction in 1967. About an hour later, or 4 hours from the time that the investigator first arrived at the murder scene, David Cote was arrested on that violation of probation charge, with another charge tacked on for possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. When they arrived back at the station, David was placed in an interview room. He was given cigarettes, coffee, and, quote, adequate opportunity to use the restroom, and then they asked him if he would consent to give hair, urine, and saliva samples. He agreed. At just about 8:30, Investigator Plevel and Deputy Paget did their first recorded interview with the suspect.
Please state your full name.
David Richard Cote. I'd say approximately between 12 and 1 o'clock.
Okay.
I was at Tangerine Bar. I left there. I was hitchhiking home. And this lady police officer for the, not Citrus, but Crystal River Police Department picked me up and gave me a ride to her residence, which is a little ways from mine. And I walked from there down almost to my van. I turned around, went over to see Virginia and have a beer with her and talk to her. Knocked on the door. There wasn't no answer. I called out who I was, opened the door. And when I first walked in, I didn't see her. When I looked over the couch where she sleeps, I seen her there. And I walked over and touched her. And I left. I went across the street to a Goldie's house. I believe her last name is Locke. Knocked on the door a couple times, nobody answered there, so I went back down the road. I'd say I got about halfway to this policewoman's house again, and I flagged his car down. He was coming off Stokes toward my direction. And he more or less didn't believe what I told him, but he gave me a ride up there with me sitting on the hood of his car. And we pulled in there, and I went in and knocked on the door and got them up, told them what happened. And they went out and talked to him.
Okay. You said this occurred approximately between 12 and 1 in the morning?
My best of knowledge, yes.
Okay. In reference to location of where your van is to where Mrs. Lawson's residence is, what direction is it, and approximately how far is it?
I'd say at least a half mile.
And you advised that you knocked on the door and announced that you... Did you say you were here?
I called out who it was.
Okay. Once you went inside, you said you didn't hear an answer or anything?
No.
Okay. Once you were inside, what was your exact actions when you saw her on the couch?
I opened the door, started to shut it, and then I walked over.
How did you touch her or move her?
I touched her with my left hand, and I put my right hand on her and rolled her over.
What part of her body did you touch?
The rib cage.
Okay. Do you know if it was the left or the right in the way she was sitting? Do you recall?
It would have to be the left-hand side.
How was she dressed when?
She wasn't hardly dressed.
Yeah, what did you see? I mean, as far as what kind of clothing?
As far as clothing, that I didn't pay no attention.
After you observed her in that condition, what was your next move once you were right there by the couch?
I went back out the door.
Right back out the door in which you came in?
Mm-hmm. Which would be the front door.
And then you proceeded across the street to try to get help?
Yes.
Were you able to contact anybody, wake anybody across the street at all?
No. I didn't really spend that much time knocking on the door.
And then you proceeded back towards the police officers?
Yes.
Approximately how long have you known Mrs. Lawson?
That's a difficult question. Better than a year, I'll tell you that. Way better than a year.
Can you tell me who introduced you?
Joyce Cufa.
After you left the residence, did you at any time change your clothes?
No.
What you have on, what I see right in front of me is a green t-shirt and a pair of blue jeans and some tennis shoes.
Short-legged pants.
Is that what you were wearing at the time that you arrived at her residence and found her on the couch?
Yes.
Is she the owner of the trailer and the property?
Yes.
What was her marital status? Was she, do you know if she was married or single?
She was married, but he was deceased.
What exactly was the position of the body when you first saw it?
And almost the exact position it was when you got there. Half on the couch and half off.
In other words, when you first saw her, her knees were on the floor and she was leaning forward against the couch with her head on one of her arms.
Mm-hmm.
That would be accurate.
From what I remember, yes.
Did you notice any wounds?
I paid no attention. I seen blood, but that was it.
Prior to this night, when you found her on the couch, when was the last time you saw her?
I'd say a couple, maybe 4 days or earlier.
Within the last week, have you had any sexual relations with her?
No.
Did you know her to have any money?
She usually carried money, yes.
Does she keep it in the pocketbook or hides it in the trailer? How does
Well,
she?
she would hide it in like a little plastic bag, put it down her bra, or put it in her pants, or put it somewhere like that.
Okay, was she quite open to telling people how she hid her money, or how did you know that? Did she just?
Well, she told me.
In what denomination would she carry the money? Would it be a large amount or small amount?
$300, $400. She's had as high as $1,000 at one time.
Okay, so it's safe to say she averaged $300 or $400 at a time that she would have it.
I mean, sometimes she'd go to the bank every day and draw money out.
As far as you knew, was she pretty well off as far as financial?
Yes, she had CDs and stuff in the bank, yes. I mean, she wasn't hurting for nothing.
What type of person was she? Was she mild to get along with, or did she have a temper? Or how would you define her?
She was easy to get along with, and she was hard to get along with. She had a temper, but most of the time she wasn't alone.
Did she drink alcoholic beverages?
Yes.
What type did she drink, do you know?
Beer, same as I do in Milwaukee.
Have you at any time ever got in a verbal confrontation with her before?
I've had arguments with her, yes.
I don't want to get nitpicky, but which ones come to mind?
Well,
Most
there was
recent?
only one that was, almost better than 6 months ago.
Okay.
That was over the boat partnership we had for crabbing and that.
Okay. So you were all in a partnership for a while?
For a while, yes. She pulled the motor off my boat, so I had to go get another one.
Have you ever stayed at that trailer as far as living there?
Yes, I have.
Did you help out with the rent or anything like that?
No, because I wasn't working except for doing crabbing.
Okay. How long did this persist? I mean, as far as time span, how long would you stay at the residence?
I'd say approximately a month, 2 months.
Would this be on and off?
No, just one time.
You mentioned to me earlier this morning that you were previously arrested back in the 60s
Back in '66, yes.
for a homicide that occurred. Can you tell me what transpired there?
Yeah, this guy broke in my apartment. I shot him with a .22, and I panicked and I run.
Where was this located at?
In Sarasota, Florida. Sarasota County.
What was the outcome of?
I had a hung jury, and the judge offered me 5 years for a cop-out for manslaughter, but I took a 3-year time served.
So you spent approximately 3 years?
I did 3 years, yes.
Where at?
Copeland.
Okay. Other than that, have you been in any trouble in Florida?
No, not in Florida. No.
What about any other states?
Michigan.
About what?
Michigan was larceny of a person. I stole a purse. I was a young kid. In Ohio, I wrote a couple checks my buddy cashed them.
Earlier this morning when we were with you, we asked you if we could have consent to search your van.
Yes.
Did you give us that consent freely?
Yes, I did.
Also earlier this morning, I asked you if you would agree to be polygraphed in regards to this incident.
I said no, sir.
What is your reason for that?
Because I am a nervous type person. I've had polygraph before, and everything that come out was a lie.
Okay. Have you thought any more about that other examination I told you about?
No, I haven't thought about it.
Now, Investigator Plevel had arrived at the scene about 2:11 a.m., just minutes after Deputy Paget. Paget briefed Plevel when he arrived and told him that he had a possible suspect, named David Cote. He said she was partially clothed in black slacks, yellow blouse, and white socks and shoes. Now, as I read that, I thought it was interesting that she would be dressed that way at midnight, down to shoes and socks. Later that day, after his first recorded interview around 5 p.m., Paget and Plevel went to the home of David's brother Leo Cote, where he lived with his girlfriend Heidi Keith, and this was about a half a mile from Virginia Lawson's residence. They had a search warrant for the property, and during its execution they found a fillet knife on the dashboard of a blue Datsun pickup that was parked in Leo Cote's yard. The knife was lying on the driver's side of the dashboard, and it was taken into evidence. Over the next few days, police spoke to numerous individuals who were familiar with David Cote and the victim, Virginia Lawson. A friend of Virginia's, named Richard, called with information around this time. He told investigators that he had left her house around 7 p.m. the previous night. He knew David, who had been arrested for DUI in the past and was, quote, in constant friction with the victim. Virginia Lawson had told him that David was not allowed to be at her residence at any time. He also shared that Leo and David Cote had purchased a boat from Virginia at one time, and they were behind on payments. Now I am going to discuss the medical examiner's report. Virginia's clothing here was described as a blue and white checkered blouse that zipped up the front. It had been cut down the back. There was blood down the front of the blouse. Her bra had been cut on the right side of the back as well. There was a marked amount of blood on the bra. There was also blood on her white cotton underpants. The slacks were black and had been torn down the right side. There was a marked amount of blood on the right sock and a small amount of blood on the top of the left sock. There was a cut in the right upper blouse and a knife cut in the right back of the blouse, a horizontal cut in the front of the pants, and a knife cut in the crotch of the underpants, as well as a knife cut in the rear crotch of the slacks. Virginia had a stab wound in her forehead, an incised wound on the right side of her neck, and a stab wound immediately below that, as well as a deep stab wound in the base of the right side of her neck. There were also 2 superficial incised wounds in the neck area. She had contusions in a line across the right, mid, and left upper chest, and contusions and abrasions at the base of her right breast. There was also a stab wound in the right lower quadrant of her abdomen. They found a patterned contusion on the dorsal or upper side of her left arm and a corresponding contusion on the medial or inside portion of her forearm. There was also a contusion involving the inner and outer portions of her right forearm. Virginia had multiple incised wounds on the palm and fingers of her left hand, and another incised wound on the palm of her right hand, which were suggestive of defensive wounds. There were 2 vertical stab wounds in the mid portion of her back. As the knife cuts to the underwear and slacks suggest, when Virginia was examined internally, there was a stab wound noted that essentially amounted to her having been sexually assaulted anally with a knife. The stab wounds in her body were deep enough that they affected multiple organs. Her lung, right kidney, there was a laceration of her bladder, small intestine, and small bowel. The maximum depth of penetration of those stab wounds was between 6 and 6.5 inches. There were a total of 7 stab wounds listed by the medical examiner, in this order: number 1 in the forehead, 2 and 3 in the neck, number 4 in the abdomen, numbers 5 and 6 in the back, and the final assault, number 7, was the anal rape. Perhaps most upsetting is the summary of this report that 63-year-old Virginia Lawson died as the result of exsanguination, secondary to multiple stab wounds. Virginia Lee Lawson was essentially tortured, and then she bled to death. Virginia Lee Lawson was a widow who had moved to Florida about 3 years prior to her murder, from Gary, Indiana. She was 63 years old, retired, and known to frequent some of the local bars, and had a reputation of keeping a $1,000 bill in her bra. She was described as a nice person who maybe was a bit too easy with her money. When he ended up in Crystal River, David Cote never really had his own place. He moved around a lot in the 7 or so years that he was in Florida, hopping from person to person, never staying very long anywhere. In November of 1985, David had been fired from a position as supervisor on the 3rd shift at Metal Industries due to problems with his drinking. Later he would try his hand at shrimping, and he received help with that in the form of money and a boat from Virginia Lawson. According to witnesses, he never paid her back, and he even lived with her by his own account for a couple of months. But then, according to witnesses, he was barred from setting foot on her property. Multiple witnesses also mentioned to police that David regularly carried a knife in a sheath on his belt. Police spoke to Goldie Locke, who lived across from Virginia Lawson. The 2 women were great friends who both lived alone, and she said that they spoke every day. In fact, she had spoken with Virginia that night around 10:30 p.m. She said she went to bed after that, but she got up around 12:30 a.m. to take her medication, and she noticed that the light above the stove in Virginia's trailer was not on. That was unusual. She said that light was on every night. Goldie told investigators that Leo Cote, David's brother, had bought a boat from Virginia, and he had made some payments. Virginia had the title to the boat and said that Leo wanted it, but she would not give it to him until he finished paying it off. Virginia told Goldie that he was 2 payments behind on the boat. The bartender at the Tangerine Bar, as well as others who were present there that night, were interviewed. David had been drinking with a guy named Mike, and they left the bar together. They stopped at a convenience store and bought a couple of Klondike bars from the clerk, who remembered them, and then sometime after that, they each went their own way. Mike recalled that David's brother Leo had stopped by Brown's Blue Crab, where he worked, the afternoon after Virginia was found, and he was inquiring about what clothes David was wearing Monday night. Investigators also spoke to a guy named Keith who had picked David up that Monday night from his brother Leo's house, and at that time he'd been wearing dark blue pants and a dark blue shirt, which fit the description of the bloody clothing that was later found in his van. Howard Agee was a friend of Virginia Lawson's, and he told investigators about that boat that she sold to Leo Cote, and that he was still paying for it. He said that the very day that police had come to interview him, Leo's girlfriend Heidi had called him and told him that Leo had been at Virginia's house the night she was killed until 11:30 p.m., and he came home with the title of that boat. So that's Leo Cote, David's brother, at Virginia Lawson's house within the same hour that his brother would later arrive, and he comes home with the title to the boat that everyone said Virginia told them she would not hand over until she got her money. Howard told investigators that he was present when Virginia told David Cote about 5 months earlier that he was never to trespass on her property. Around July 10th, at 10 a.m., investigators interviewed David Cote for the second time.
You recall the night that you gave us consent to search your van?
Yes.
The items that we took out of the van, were they yours?
From what I could see, yes.
There was a blue t-shirt and a blue pair of, like, man's knits pants that you said that it was yours that we took out of there.
Yes.
When was the last time you wore those?
I'd say a couple days ago.
Do you recall where you wore them or what you did in them?
No, I don't.
But during the time that you went to the house, you were wearing the greenish t-shirt and the blue jean pants.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, were you wearing those articles when you were at the bar earlier?
Yes.
After the recording ended, David admitted to investigators that he was wearing the blood-stained blue pants that night, and he got blood on them while checking Virginia's body. He said he went back to his van and he changed his clothes, and that he was also wearing that blue shirt that was confiscated. This same day, about 5 hours after his second recorded interview, he gave his third and final interview to police.
Why did you go to her house? Why did you go all the way back to Goldie's house instead of going to the police officer's house to start with?
I don't really know. It'd been closer going to the police officer's house.
You never went back in Lawson's house after you left the first time?
No.
Where all did you go in that house when you were in Miss Lawson's house?
Just from the door to where she was, not the door.
We got evidence to say different than that, David.
I wasn't nowhere else.
David, we understand there may be some problems.
I did not kill her.
You had nothing to do with her murder.
No, sir, I didn't. All I did was find it.
I'm going to tell you something. Some of the blood on that shirt could have got there only by the person that was doing the killing.
No, I did not.
And we're going to be able to prove that.
I did not
And
kill
if
her.
they mitigating circumstances on your part, you don't want this is a death penalty case.
Yes, I know. But I don't even carry anything. I don't even carry a fingernail file or anything.
We're not saying you're carrying anything. And the evidence is looking at you very hard.
Well, I
And if there's mitigating circumstances, if there's some reason, if she jumped on you for some reason, my friend, you best tell us now.
I did not kill her. I didn't even talk to her.
Because the evidence is going to come back strong. And I think the evidence is going to come back and say you was involved in it.
I was not involved.
Do you know who was?
No, I don't. I almost didn't even call her in, but I knew I had to.
Why did you know you had to?
I don't know. I didn't want to see her laying there all this time and nobody knowing what happened. Or that something happened.
Why did you go down there?
To talk to her and have a beer.
At that time of night, is that usual?
She's usually up till 4 o'clock, maybe sometimes 5 o'clock in the morning.
There's evidence there, David. There's always evidence there.
Yes, I know. But I did not kill her.
She grabbed your hair.
No, she didn't.
Hmm?
No, she didn't.
No, she
She
didn't.
was dead when I got there.
You'd had to been in the wrong place to get the blood on it. If you just walked up there and touched her, you didn't get that blood. Not that quantity of blood on your clothes unless you were involved in the murder.
I was not involved.
There's a lot of blood on his clothes there.
I don't know how much is on.
And there's blood consistent with you being there when she was killed, David.
I was not
There's
there.
such a thing as blood splatter opposed to blood transfer. And there's blood splatter on that shirt.
I was not there.
You had to be there.
How do you explain blood splatter?
I don't know.
You wouldn't have got that blood splatter on that shirt unless you were there, David.
I
when
was
she
not
killed.
there, and I did not kill her.
You gonna hold with that story all the way through?
Yes, I was not there.
Okay.
About a week after Virginia Lawson's homicide, Heidi Keith, Leo Cote's live-in girlfriend, was served an investigative subpoena by the Citrus County Sheriff's Office, and she was brought in for an interview. On the morning of July 6th, she says that she went to bed around 1 in the afternoon. She said that Leo was going to turn off the TV to get his brother David to leave the house. They'd been having problems with him. All he wanted to do was lay around the house and watch TV all the time. She said Leo went to Virginia Lawson's house on the night she was murdered around 9:20 p.m. Now, investigators already had information from a man named Howard who said Heidi called him just after the homicide and told her that Leo had been at Virginia's house the night she was killed until 11:30 p.m. and came home with the title to the boat. Heidi told investigators that Leo called Virginia and said he needed to get a registration for the boat so he could renew the sticker. Heidi alleged that Virginia later called back and told her that she had the registration, so Leo went over there to pick up the papers. This conflicts with what every other witness said Virginia had told them about not giving the boat title to Leo until he paid for the boat in full. That also conflicts with Goldie Locke, who spoke with her friend Virginia around 10:30 p.m., during the time that Leo would have been there, and at no time in the phone call did Virginia mention that Leo was there with her, or that he had stopped by. Investigators asked Heidi questions about fillet knives and how many Leo owned. She did admit, though, that after investigators had left their house on the day Virginia was found, after they served the search warrant on their property, the two of them went to Brown's Blue Crab and located Mike, the guy that David had been with that night at the bar. She said Leo was curious about what kind of clothing that David had been seen wearing that Monday night. A witness named Clyde, who had been at a July 4th party the weekend before the homicide with David, said that he had become abusive and nearly got into a fight. Clyde was with a group of friends who brought David Cote back to their friend Joyce's house, and then the rest of them left to go watch fireworks, leaving David behind. They took him home on Sunday and went along to Virginia's house after that. He called them while they were there and said that he had left his pants in their truck, so they had to drive back over to his van and return them. This witness said Virginia told him she didn't want David on her property and that he owed her over $1,000. He said that he used to crab with David and he knew that he owned a long fillet knife, about 6 or 7 inches long. Another witness named Viola Davis told investigators that she believed David had an affair with that friend named Joyce while she was living with a man named Mate Crawford.
Have you ever lived anywhere in Crystal River or Ozello area before?
Just, Homosassa Springs.
Homosassa Springs.
Homosassa Springs, Crystal River.
Have you ever lived in Crystal River?
I stayed in Crystal River for a while, across the post office, at that Joyce Keefer's house.
Viola said that her phone had been used frequently for conversations between David and Joyce for about 2 years. Mate Crawford also ended up dead, and that case is also still unsolved, and he was killed just the year before Virginia Lawson's homicide. At around 3:30 in the afternoon on Monday, May 5th, 1986, Mate Crawford's body was found by electric line workers on a remote stretch of the Ozello Trail about 2.5 miles west of US 19. So this is 3 days after he'd last been seen. Mate was found lying face down on the north side of Ozello Road, wearing a light-colored shirt and jeans, and his body was lying partially in a canal from around his backside down. His left arm was extended and the right arm was partially beneath his body. A Tampa Bay Times article from the next day described his position as, quote, his left arm was on the road shoulder and his legs were still in the water of the roadside ditch. The worker who had found him described them pulling over and he opened up the passenger door and Mate was right there on the ground. So he was not far off the road at all. One of the workers who had found him helped the police, using a long stick that he had, recover $21 and an open pack of Camel cigarettes that were floating near the body. Mate had a set of keys in his back pocket and a wallet in his other back pocket. Joyce's daughter Kelly was only 12 when Mate Crawford was killed, but she remembers him fondly. When I reached out to her, she was immediately on board with helping in any way that she could.
My mother couldn't drive because my mom was disabled. My mom had it was called Gaucher's disease. I might be pronouncing it wrong. It was a rare bone deterioration disease. And that was part of the reason she had 2 artificial hips. He was our main source of everything. And I do remember him having like a mullet fishing boat. And that's because he was a fisherman, and that's how he would get most of his money. But like I said, my mom was drawing Social Security from either my father or from her. I think it was from my father back then. And Johnny, which we called him Johnny because his name is Johnny Mate or Mate Johnny, one or the other, but we called him Johnny. Mm-hmm. He took off with my mom's money. I know my mom and Johnny were together for about 5 or 6 years, so. But I was 12 when she had passed, I think.
Was your mother, do you recall your mother being romantically involved with David Cote?
I do remember that. I do remember my mother back then would have relationship with anybody that she would show her affection. And I do remember there was David, there was a guy named Clyde, and then Johnny. But they used to all run around together. I do remember that night, him and my mom had gotten into an argument. I remember that they fought because it was rent money, and it was her Social Security money. And I think that they, like I said, and I remember the bar. I remember going to the bar because back then we were allowed in the bar. And I think it was like a little restaurant too, because I do remember sitting there eating at some point.
I think it might have been. Yeah, I think it might have been.
But it was a bar. And I do remember we were at the bar that night, and my mom and I went home. I don't remember how we got home.
The Ozello Trail is a remote stretch of two-lane blacktop that winds its way through the St. Martin's Nature Preserve toward a lovely scenic coast at the Gulf of Mexico, to its own set of keys that are nestled between Homosassa Springs and Crystal River. It is an off-the-beaten-path area that I am sure the locals appreciate. Historically, the community has had between 400 and 600 residents. Now, the Ozello Trail, to be blunt, is what I would expect a killer would think an ideal place to dump a body, which is essentially what happened to John Mate Crawford in May of 1986, about a year before Virginia Lawson was killed. However, police could never say publicly, or at all, whether he was shot there or put there afterward. I will note that based on the side of the road where he was found, the north side, logic would indicate that the vehicle doing the alleged dumping was heading away from US 19 and the Crystal River area toward Ozello in a westerly direction, meaning the killer might not have been coming from the Ozello area, but bringing him to that area. I would say with a population that small, it would be pretty dumb for someone from that area to put a body that close to where they lived, on the only road that led in and out of the place. The last time he was seen was by the owner of the Crystal Lounge, who waved goodbye to him, he thought, around 1 a.m. the night before, or the morning before. And that lounge, for context, was located just east of the intersection of State Road 44 and County Road 486, less than 2 miles from where Mate and Joyce lived on Rock Crusher Road. It was 10 miles from where he was found. How did Mate Crawford get all the way to Ozello without a vehicle, if Joyce and Virginia left him at the bar? Somebody took him there.
My mother met Johnny, and we traveled a lot. And I think we ended up in Crystal River because he started doing fishing and crabbing over there. And that's how we ended up staying over in that area.
So do you generally remember everything being good with your mom and Mate during that time period?
Yes, I do. So we did a lot of things together. And he and I were buddies. We had goats, we had chickens, we had the horse, we had dogs. I don't think at that time he was fishing. I think at that time he was doing handyman services for a bunch of different people. Okay.
So do you have a sense of when things turned bad around your house specifically, or when you started to feel like, did that start happening after Mate died, or what did it start happening before he died?
It was definitely afterward because there was a bunch of different people. Like I said, Dave, Clyde, a few different people frequented the house after the fact, after Johnny had passed. Most of the time I don't remember Dave and Clyde and all them being around until after Johnny had passed.
Paint me a picture of the house you grew up in at that point when these people are in and out of your house. You know, what's going on then?
We lived in the house across the street from the post office. Next door was a shopping center, which was Publix, and I do believe it was a Kmart back then. Of course, I was younger, and these people were in and out of the house when Mom got her checks, of course. And when they would come in, they would all drink, party, and then once the money was gone, they would leave. So that at that time, I was pretty much, like I said, on my own, going to Kmart and Publix and stealing whatever food that I could steal at the time to be able to eat myself. And then, of course, once the checks rolled back in, everybody seemed to conjure up again, and party and hang out at the house, and that's pretty much it. That's all I remember until I left when I was 13 or 14.
So it felt like there was a definite point where things got bad, and it seems to correlate with once Mate had died. Okay.
Yes.
So when do you recall David Cote entering the picture? After also?
Yes, it was. I remember him being around in the house at the post office, but I don't remember him being around at any other time. If he was, he wasn't a frequent flyer.
So there were a couple people in the report that said they believed that your mom and David were carrying on an affair before Mate died. One woman, her name was Viola, I believe, had said that your mom and David would talk on her phone, and it sounds like she was a neighbor at one point. So your sense is that you didn't pick up as a kid on any of that until afterward.
That's correct.
Do you remember your mom and Mate drinking a lot or fighting or any of that?
They drank excessively, yes. As far as fist fighting, no. I do remember arguing a lot, but a lot of that time was because of the money issue and because of the drinking and those types of things. I do remember, every time Mate would go out and, work and do whatever he had to do to make money, Mom would always, of course, want him to go buy beer and stuff, and there were sometimes that he wouldn't. He would rather spend money on doing other things besides drinking, but a majority of the time they were drinking together.
Mate Crawford was last seen Friday night, May 2nd, in the wee hours of Saturday morning around 1 a.m. as best the owner of the Crystal Lounge could recollect. And the owner knew Mate, and he waved at him as he left the bar, alone, he said. Mate wasn't found until Monday afternoon. The assumption was that someone had seen him flashing money at a bar and offered him a ride home and killed him. It was not until a year later, when Virginia Lawson was killed, that investigators would question witnesses in her case about both homicides. At the scene where he was found, investigators rolled Mate over and they found a small hole in the center of his chest, consistent with a small caliber bullet wound. They would later find that he was shot twice. And they tracked down one of Mate's brothers in Pensacola, and that's where they got Joyce's name as Mate's live-in girlfriend. So it wasn't until around 8 p.m. that Monday night that Joyce was finally notified of Mate's death by phone. And then about an hour later, at 9 p.m., they went over to the Rock Crusher Road address to interview her. It was a brief interview. She told them that she had been at the Crystal Lounge Friday night with a friend, and they left around 11 or 12 midnight. According to Joyce, Mate said he was not ready to leave when they wanted to leave, and he said he would get a ride home later. She verified that the clothing he had been found in sounded like what he had last been seen wearing, and told them he had about $400 or $500 on him that night. She said she had not seen Mate since then. The investigator did ask Joyce what the last meal was that she knew Mate had eaten, and she told him they had been to dinner at a Chinese restaurant between 7 and 8 p.m. Friday night. They verified with the owner of the Crystal Lounge that he knew Mate Crawford, and he had waved to him when he left the bar that night, and he had been alone. And he said that he thought he left around 1 a.m., but he couldn't be exactly sure of the time. So I've done my best to piece together what led up to Mate's death using all of the witness statements of that first weekend of May in 1986. Leo's daughter, Dawn, says on Friday, May 2nd, Heidi Keith introduced her to Virginia Lawson and Mate Crawford at Virginia's house. Joyce and an unknown male were there, as were the girls, Stephanie and Joyce's daughter Kelly. On this Friday, Dawn said that Mate had $500 that Joyce had given him to buy tires for a van. Around noon that Friday, a woman named Rhonda, who had lived in a trailer near where Mate and Joyce lived before they moved to Rock Crusher Road, spent the day with Joyce and Mate. She said she was there when Mate left the house that afternoon. Joyce would later tell police that between 7 and 8 p.m., she and Mate had dinner at a Chinese restaurant. Now, there was an argument between the two sometime this evening, but it's not clear whether that was at the Chinese restaurant, like Joyce said, or at the Crystal Lounge, like Kelly, her daughter, said, where they would be later. Maybe it was both. And Joyce has told conflicting accounts of that argument to different people. But at some point, presumably, because of this argument, Joyce rented a motel room. Rhonda said she went to the Crystal Lodge motel room later that night after Joyce had left Mate at the Chinese restaurant because he was flirting with a blonde girl. That's what Joyce had told her. Rhonda said she ate pizza with Joyce and then left the motel room at 8:30. But she does not mention Joyce's daughter Kelly or Stephanie being in that motel room that night or being at the house that afternoon while she was with Mate and Joyce. In that case, it does seem odd that Joyce would be ordering pizza so soon after eating Chinese food with Mate. At some point after that, Joyce and Mate apparently end up together at the Crystal Lounge with Virginia Lawson. But she says she and the friend left the Crystal Lounge around 11 p.m. or midnight. She said Mate did not want to leave, so he stayed. I assume the friend was driving because Kelly said her mom didn't drive, which means her friend would have had to come pick Joyce up at the motel and take her to the Crystal Lounge that night. The owner of the Crystal Lounge would later say that he saw Mate leave alone, and he wasn't sure about the time, but he thought it was around 1 a.m. So it sounds like you remember being at that restaurant when they were arguing and leaving, and you're saying you don't think it was the Chinese restaurant. You think you were at the bar. Okay, so you were at
Yes.
that. All right. Was Stephanie there too?
I don't recall. I don't think she was. I think she came in afterward.
So do you think it's possible that you guys got the motel the next day on Saturday, not Friday? Like
Possibly.
Yeah. On Saturday, May 3rd, around 10 or 11 a.m., Stephanie says that she woke up at Joyce's house. She spent the night with Kelly, and Mate Crawford had still not come home. She said Joyce told her and Kelly to go to a phone and call Virginia Lawson and told them that they were going to stay in a motel and leave a note for Mate at home. Stephanie says Virginia gets there about 12:30 that afternoon on Saturday, and from there they go to the Crystal Lodge and they rented a room. Kelly, Joyce, and Stephanie were all there, and Stephanie said that Virginia came and went several times. So if that was the case, why would she be getting a motel in that situation if it wasn't because of the fight? You know what I mean? Like, can you think of it? I'm just trying to spitball. Is it just because maybe she was thinking Mate was more angry than he...
Yes,
Okay.
and that's exactly what I was just about to say. Maybe it's because she didn't want to fight with him whenever he got home.
Because he didn't show up, yeah.
If that was the case.
Yeah, because he went missing Friday night, early Saturday morning. They didn't find him till Monday. So that's like 2.5 days. Nobody met, would that have been out of the ordinary for him to be gone that long?
I don't remember him taking off and going somewhere that long. I don't remember that at all. So that would have been unordinary for him.
Okay. On Sunday, May 4th, Stephanie says they checked out of the motel room around 11:45 a.m. There was another witness named Erna Dillon, and she was a friend of Virginia Lawson and an acquaintance of Joyce. And she said on Sunday that Joyce, Virginia, and Kelly visited her at her trailer. She said Joyce told her that the night before she and Mate had been at the Crystal Lounge and they got in an argument. Joyce told her that Mate left before them and left Virginia and Joyce at the bar. The women arrived home and they saw Mate's vehicle was not there, so they went to Virginia's to spend the night. This does not match with Rhonda saying that she was with Virginia at the motel room the night Mate and Joyce got into a fight after they had dinner at the Chinese restaurant. It's also the opposite of what Joyce told police. She told them she and Virginia had left the Crystal Lodge first. The sad reality is that I don't come out of this research any clearer on the possible links in Mate Crawford's death to Virginia Lawson's, but I would certainly put David Cote at the top of my person of interest list, knowing what we know now. It looks like you guys moved to the house across from the post office after Mate died. Rhonda said she helped you guys move, and she said she thought it was about a month after Mate's murder. Do you know why you moved?
Well, because I think we were out in the middle of nowhere. And again, Mom didn't drive. And we needed to be closer to town for certain things.
Okay, that definitely makes sense. Do you remember David after that staying there for a period of time with you?
Yeah, I mean, him and Clyde. There was another guy named Clyde that was always involved.
So there in the report, there was an incident about you finding David and your mom together, and that's about 2 weeks after. Do you recall that incident?
I do recall her being with somebody. I don't remember who it was. I thought it was Clyde, but it could have been Dave. I walked in the bedroom on them.
One of the things that I learned from Virginia's case file is that David Cote was very familiar with the Ozello area. He had even taken Virginia and Leo's daughter Dawn and others fishing there. The police report also noted that Rhonda told them Joyce banned her from coming to her house after she learned that she had spoken to investigator Les Cross about Mate Crawford's homicide. Also, an interesting note, there's a page in Mate Crawford's police report that is in Stephanie's mom's handwriting, and it says, quote, "I have been told by Joyce, the live-in girlfriend, that the bartender at the Crystal Lounge took Johnny Crawford to the Palms bar, where he was apparently walking home at the time of his murder. I last saw Johnny Crawford 2 days before his killing, as they were previous neighbors of ours before the move to Rock Crusher Road. His daughter and my daughter were very close and therefore knew him very well." It is noted in the file on Virginia Lawson's homicide that a polygraph appointment was set up for Joyce on September 14, 1987. That day, a man named Howard Agee, her landlord, would call and say that she was ill, so she couldn't come, and a week later she would pass away. Here is an interview that I recreated with Joyce that was done 12 days after her friend Virginia Lawson's homicide.
Joyce, this is an investigation of a homicide, as we have already mentioned. I'd like for you to tell me, when was the last time you saw Virginia Lawson?
The day before.
The day before she was killed?
Yes, sir. I spent the day with her.
Let's see, that was Sunday, right? Sunday would have been the 5th. Tell me how you got over there. Tell me everything. First of all, let's back up. You tell me everything that happened from Friday, the 3rd of July, up till you were finished talking to her.
Well, I saw her on the 3rd. That's when I saw her. It was on the 3rd because I was home the 4th of July because I went to the fireworks. So I spent the day with her on the 3rd while my friends were at Hunter Springs playing volleyball. And they were supposed to pick me up. And they did not pick me up, so I called Mr. Howard Agee and Daniel, which is our neighbor across the street. And they came and picked me up and took me home. And right after that, my friends showed up to pick me up and Ginny told them I had already left.
Okay, I want to talk about that, being the 3rd. Do you remember the party that Clyde and Mike and Dave...
Well, they were going to a party, but I did not go.
Okay, but you remember the party?
Yeah, I remember them talking about going.
And that was on Saturday the 4th? But you went to her house after that party happened, didn't you?
Yeah, the next day.
And it would have been the 5th, not the 4th.
Yeah, I was over there the next day also. I went there the 3rd and the 5th and spent the day with her on the 5th.
All right, let's go back to the 3rd then. So Friday the 3rd, you were at her house. How'd you get there?
Clyde took me.
Tell me what happened at Ginny's house. What did you talk about? You just visited?
Yeah, we just visited. Watched TV, lunch.
Any main topic of conversation?
No, we were just watching mostly TV. We went to the grocery store.
Did she seem to be upset about anything?
Oh, not really. She was just upset about her dog tearing stuff up, which she always did.
How did you get back home on the 3rd?
Clyde picked me up. I come back home with Clyde on the 3rd. The 5th, Howard and Daniel picked me up.
Okay, let's go back to the 5th. Were you at Virginia Lawson's again?
Yep.
She's called Ginny, right?
Yeah, I call her Ginny. Always did.
How did you get to her house on the 5th?
Clyde took me. They went back to play volleyball, but then he didn't come back and pick me up like he was supposed to. So that's when Daniel and Howard came and got me and took me home.
While you were at Virginia's that day, did anything unusual happen?
Well, only thing I can say is that she mentioned she seemed like she was a little distressed. And the reason I say that is she said something about she might have to go back up north to have some surgery. Because she was like, she had bad intestines. And she was getting to the point where she felt like she was going to have to get it done again. And she was, really upset about that. And I said, well, Jenny, just give it time. Maybe it'll just blow over. And she said she had tried to call her nephews the night before and she couldn't get through.
What kind of person was Jenny?
Oh, the sweetest in the world.
Did she help a lot of people?
Everybody.
Did she carry money with her?
Well, she never, as far as I know of, big lump sum, but she could get it if she needed it in a hurry.
Did she ever carry money on her person, her body?
Well, she had a little pouch that I knew about because she made me one.
Tell me about that pouch.
It was like, a man's pocket, pants pocket. She'd make it and pin it to her inside her jeans.
What do you mean, pin it? Where?
In her bra. Pin it to her bra or inside her pocket of her outside jeans. Yes, it was a large amount of money before she got to the bank.
How much money did she usually carry on her person in that pouch?
I have no idea. I never seen it.
Did you ever see her with a $1,000 bill on her person?
No. She always carried maybe $100 in her purse. That's it.
What color was this pouch?
Usually white. Well, she made me one that was white. I don't know what color she had.
So she'd take a safety pin and pin this?
Uh-huh. She taught me to do the same thing, because when I got my checks, so that nobody would take my money, she made me one. So that's how come I knew. She says I always carry it here or here.
Meaning either in her bra or her pants? On the inside of her pants, she usually kept that pouch with her?
Now, I don't know. I never seen her undressed, to tell you the truth. I never asked her. It was none of my business, really.
Did she have any enemies?
No, not that I know of, except for Dave.
Except for Dave. Why would you classify Dave as someone she didn't like?
She'd bought him a boat motor to go in business in crabbing, and this was like about $2,600 for a brand new motor, and Dave was supposed to pay her back. So she got the boat motor back after it sunk twice, the boat sunk, and she had to take one of her, she told me, this is hearsay, she told me, I don't know for sure, but she had to take a CD out, one of her CDs, to pay off the boat motor, to the bank because of interest.
How long ago was that?
Maybe 5-6 months.
All right, and she said she was in a partnership with David Cote at the time? So she got mad at David over that?
Yeah, she took that motor back.
Did David usually come to visit her at her house?
No, not after that happened.
Have you ever heard her tell David not to come to her house?
I haven't heard her, but she just told me that she told him he wasn't welcome there.
How many times has she told you that?
Several.
When was the last time she told you she didn't want David at her house?
Last time I seen her, on the 5th.
Would that have been Sunday the 5th?
Yep.
What did she say exactly?
I had told her what David had done at the party and that Howard threw him out of his house. So he came over and I gave him a place to sleep on the couch. And I says, we was coming to Crystal River 'cause the guys wanted to play volleyball, like I said. And I said, we got to drop off Dave. Dave rode in the back of the truck even. I said, Clyde, we got to drop Dave off first 'cause you know he's not welcome at Ginny's. And that's exactly what I told Ginny. And Ginny said, it's a good thing you did, Joyce.
All right, let's back up a little bit again. Let's go to the 3rd, Friday, the 3rd of July. Clyde brought you back home to Water Oak from Virginia Lawson's house. You got home what time on Friday the 3rd?
Well, I guess about 7.
Did you see David Cote on Friday the 3rd after you got home, or did you not see him?
No, I don't think it was the 3rd. I didn't see him 'cause they didn't go to the party.
Well, when did he get in that area, the Turner Camp area? When did he arrive here?
His brother brought him over. Him and his brother had a dispute.
Oh, really? What kind of argument did they have?
I don't know. I just know his brother dropped him off.
Where did his brother drop him off?
At my house.
What time was that?
Approximately, I guess, maybe 6.
Now that was Friday night, Friday the 3rd? The tape can't hear you nod your head.
Oh yeah, sorry. Him and his brother had some kind of dispute about something. I don't know. I never did find out.
How did you know they had a dispute?
I asked Clyde. I said, what's Dave doing here? I thought Clyde brought him, and he said, no, Leo dropped him off. Him and Leo had a fight. That's when I knew he was there.
And where did David stay that night?
He stayed on my couch.
What kind of clothes was David wearing?
Regular blue work pants or jeans?
What kind of shirt was he wearing?
I don't know.
Did he bring extra clothes with him?
No.
Did he have any money?
He had a little bit, yeah.
About how much did he have?
Maybe $30.
So you saw that $30?
No, but I know he went into the store and bought a 12-pack and he bought me a pack of cigarettes.
What store did he go to?
Circle K.
How did he get there?
Clyde took him.
That's the Circle K on Turner Camp Road?
Yeah, uh-huh.
So that was Friday night. So he slept on your couch Friday night.
Yeah, then they went to the party Saturday.
Who went to the party?
Dave and Mike and Clyde. I stayed home. That was Friday night, the party, before the 4th. The 3rd was the party. The 4th I stayed home. They come by. I don't know what time they come back in, and that's when Dave came over after the party. After he got thrown out of the party, thrown out of Howard's house, he slept on my couch.
Saturday night he slept at your house.
Yeah, Mike and Clyde came over. I was sleeping and they woke me up. They said, "Now come on, get up. You don't remember we're supposed to go to the fireworks right here in Inverness?"
What time was that?
Oh, we left there about 5 to get there early, get a good parking space.
Who went to the fireworks?
Me and Mike and Clyde.
Where was Dave?
Sleeping on my couch. I left him. I wasn't going to take him. He wasn't invited anyway.
What time did you get home from the fireworks?
Let's see. I guess about 9:30, 10.
Was Dave still at your house?
Uh-huh. Still sleeping when we got home.
Did you talk to him at all on Saturday night?
He just asked me where I went. I said I'd been to the fireworks. I sat there and I watched the VCR. Then I went to bed. Then we took him back the next day.
Did he try to borrow any money from you?
$5.
Did he try to borrow more than $5?
No, I gave him $5 to buy groceries.
Did he ask for more than 5?
No, he just asked me if he could have $5.
If he had $30 on him, why would he want to borrow $5 for groceries?
He done blew it on the weekend.
Spend it during the weekend?
Uh-huh.
Did he tell you that he was broke? He can't hear you nod, Joyce.
Oh, sorry. He did tell me he was broke. He needed $5 to buy him some groceries.
Okay, so Sunday morning.
We took him to Publix.
What Publix?
Crystal River. Before we took him home, we took him to Publix in Crystal River. Let him buy some groceries, then we took him home. That's the last I seen of him.
Who's we?
Me and Clyde and Mike.
So you, Clyde, Mike, and Dave went to Publix in Crystal River on Sunday. From there, where did you go?
Took Dave home.
Where did you take him specifically?
To his brother's house. He got out of his truck, and he got into his trailer.
Trailer?
Well, van. He lives in like a van.
So you got to Ginny's house on Sunday and the guys went to play volleyball. You told Ginny you dropped Dave off at his place.
Uh-huh.
And she said she was glad.
Yeah, 'cause I told her, I says, "Ginny, I knew better than to bring him here." And she said, "Thank you, Joyce."
Have you ever seen Dave or Ginny get into an argument or in any type of dispute?
Oh, yeah, I have. One time at my home.
Tell me what happened.
Well, we were sitting there talking, and everything was going fine and dandy, and Ginny had a few beers. And Ginny mentioned to Dave that, something about, Dave wanting to take her to bed, and Ginny denied it.
Wait, Ginny heard Dave say that Dave wanted to take her to bed?
Yeah, and Ginny denied it. Ginny called him a goddamn liar and threw a beer can at him, and then she reached in her purse, and she got out her blackjack, which she always carried, her blackjack, and she went to hit him with it, and he grabbed her arm, and took the blackjack away from her, and he gave it to me. And I said, "Dave, if you lay a hand on her, I'm going to use the blackjack on you. You won't have to worry about her." And then it was over and done with.
How long ago was that?
About 2 months. And that's the only dispute that they've ever gotten into that I've been there. They've gotten in other discussions about business between the boat and motor, but that was nothing violent or anything.
Did Ginny ever go crabbing with him?
Uh-huh, a couple times.
Have you ever known Dave to own any fillet knives?
Of course, he's in that business. He usually had it on a belt, in a case.
How long was the knife?
Blade was about that long.
How long are you indicating? 7, 8 inches?
I don't know. I'm not a carpenter.
The space you've indicated looks about 7 or 8 inches.
Okay.
How long have you known Dave?
About 4 years.
How did you meet?
I met him through John Mate Crawford. Yeah, because I've known Ginny ever since I moved here. About 2 weeks after I moved here, I met Ginny because Johnny Mate redid the front porch.
Do you know if David Cote owns any guns?
He owns a broken-down shotgun with no stock or nothing on it.
Is there anything else you can think of that might assist us in this investigation?
Well, let me think. I know there's not a soul that I can think of that would want to do any harm to her, that hated her, except for that one person.
That one person being David?
He had a grudge against her, and she had a grudge against him. Dave had to be awful drunk in order to do that.
Why do you say that?
Because I still can't honestly think that that could have been inside of him, but, who knows, maybe. Because he's always been good to me and my daughter. My daughter always called him Uncle Dave. I've got a 14-year-old daughter, and to her, that's Uncle Dave. About a month after the Virginia Lawson homicide, investigators received a call from Leo Cote's daughter, who was obviously David's niece. Her name was Dawn. Dawn told them that she had information that led her to believe that David could have committed the homicide of Virginia Lawson. This information led to police traveling out of state to interview several family witnesses. Although I will not get into specific details, there were allegations from several of David Cote's family members that he had molested them when they were minors. Leo Cote's daughter Dawn said that she was introduced to Virginia Lawson by Heidi Keith, Leo's live-in girlfriend, the day before Mate Crawford was killed. She also mentioned, as did other family members, that they all believed David Cote had killed an Indian male in Michigan sometime around 1975. Coincidentally, an investigator that had worked in Citrus County when Mate Crawford was killed had moved out of state to Tennessee, and when investigators arrived there, they updated him on Virginia's case, and he discussed his investigation into the Mate Crawford homicide up until the time he had left. The police report says, quote, Officer Les Cross scanned the report for similarities between the Mate Crawford death and the Virginia Lawson death, but he was unable to find any new connecting factors that they weren't already aware of. It's clear that they were looking at both of these cases as possibly being somehow related. Next, the investigators interviewed David Cote's ex-wife. They were married in 1970 in Port Huron, Michigan, and he was on parole at the time. David was physically abusive toward her, and she said that he had a drinking problem. She described the escalation of violence to be sexually abusive in nature, and in one particularly violent incident, he forced his entire fist into her vagina, causing her to miscarry. Somewhere between May and July of 1985, she and David had to take their son to Detroit Children's Hospital for a procedure related to his heart. The night before the family was to leave for the Children's Hospital, David Cote stayed out drinking all night. She got up around 6 a.m. on the morning of that procedure, and she went outside to put the baby's car seat in the car, and she found what appeared to be a large amount of blood on the passenger side of the front seat. She asked David what happened, and he said he didn't know, and then went outside to try and clean up the car, after which they left for the hospital. She said that a blanket had to be put on the seat for the trip to the hospital because it was soaked with blood. The child was in the hospital for about a week, and when she came home, she asked David again about the blood. David told her that a man made a pass at him in the car, and he stabbed him. He said he then dumped the man in a wooded area, possibly at either a rest stop or a way station on Interstate 94. David told her he'd been driving the man somewhere from a bar in Port Huron when the incident occurred. He told her that he went back about a month later to see if the body was still there where he dumped it, but it was gone. She said David described the victim as an Indian from Canada. She said one night David came home drunk or high and threatened her and her sister-in-law with a gun. He then held the gun at his sister-in-law's head and ordered her to load all of his belongings into his vehicle, which was a van at the time. He left and she filed for divorce the next day, but she took him back shortly thereafter. A little while later, he was involved in a hit and run in South Park, Michigan, and he fled to Florida to avoid prosecution. They were divorced after that. David's brother Robert, or Bob, also told investigators a story about the Indian, and that David had said he'd cut his throat and thrown him out of the car, and he thought it was a place in Port Huron called the Active Bar, where he had picked the man up. Back in Florida, Virginia's nephew came into town while they were investigating. and he found among Virginia's belongings notes that she had written down about the homicide of Mate Crawford, as well as a revolver that was wrapped in a washcloth and placed in a plastic bag and tied. Another weapon, a .22 caliber handgun, was also found, but police only took the revolver and the notes related to Mate Crawford's homicide into evidence. Alfred told investigators that the day before, Leo Cote had come to speak with him at Virginia's house and said that he thought Virginia bought that revolver from Joyce. As far as evidence goes, the reports that I have indicate that they found footprints of sneakers that matched David Cote's in the back bathroom on the floor at Virginia's trailer. Testing would later reveal one of David Cote's palm prints on the couch, and the blood found on the clothing located in David Cote's van was Virginia Lawson's blood type. David's McGregor sneakers were inspected along with vinyl floor covering from the bathroom where the shoe impressions were found. They found 5 shoe impressions at the scene. 2 were eliminated, as having not been made by the McGregors. 2 separate shoe impressions from the scene were found to be similar in tread design with the sole of either of the McGregor sneakers. 2 cigarette butts were found at the scene that matched the brand that David Cote smoked, and 2 open beer cans were found at the scene as well. Law enforcement believed that the hour and a half between when Officer Leota first gave David Cote a ride and when he returned to her home about 1:30 a.m. evidenced a longer visit by David to Virginia's house than what he was telling them, and that was their basis and evidence for his eventual arrest. Florida Department of Law Enforcement prepared a report on the blood evidence at the scene and rendered these conclusions. They said the couch cushions and carpet in front of the couch had areas of splashed or free-fallen blood which originated from the bleeding victim. The couch, table, and plywood behind the couch were targets of projected medium-velocity spatter that originated from the bleeding victim on the couch. The south and west walls of the living room were targets for cast-off blood originating from an assailant who was near the couch. The blood-stained shirt found in David Cote's van had a contact blood stain as well as cast-off blood projected as medium-velocity spatter. The pants had contact blood stains, and projected blood consisted with medium-velocity spatter. FDLE's conclusion, based on their reconstruction, describes forceful bloodshed with points of origin from the couch, which was adjacent to the south wall of the living room. They also concluded that whoever was wearing the blood-stained blue pants was present and in close proximity to forceful bloodshed and came in contact with a bloody object. I want you to note that there has been zero mention of any blood evidence found anywhere else in the home of Virginia Lee Lawson. In the beginning of December of 1987, David Cote was charged with the murder of Virginia Lee Lawson. The trial didn't actually begin until 1989. The month before the trial would start, his lawyer did an interview and talked about another crime that had occurred a couple years earlier in Crystal River, and not that far away. From the Tampa Bay Times, excerpted from an article written by Charlie Goffin. Did David Richard Cote stab 2 elderly Citrus County women to death several years earlier, or does his attorney just want you to think so?
The crimes are all similar in nature,
said Cote's attorney, Charles Horn.
Identical knife thrusts, a very distinct methodology.
It's not often that a criminal defense attorney tries to link the crime his client is accused of to unsolved murder cases, but Horn says his plan for defending Cote requires such an odd tactic.
If those crimes are so similar to the Lawson murder that they may have been committed by the same person, then we have to determine whether there's evidence to establish Cote's innocence of those crimes. And if in fact, were it to be established that Cote couldn't have done them, or there was someone else's prints at the scene of those crimes, then it would raise questions.
He hoped those questions would equal reasonable doubt. Now, the other homicides in question were that of 2 Crystal River sisters in their 80s, Ethel Lynch Reynolds and Frida Lynch Demotion, who were killed in the early morning of New Year's Eve in 1983. Their throats were slashed, and there was a sexual component to at least one of their murders as well. At the time, the Citrus County Sheriff's Captain acknowledged that Cote had in fact been considered a suspect in that double homicide.
He has not been ruled out, but we are not actively pursuing that right now. There are no investigative leads at this time.
Law enforcement said there were other homicides he was being investigated for in Michigan, Tennessee, and Canada. 2 different inmates that had been housed with him at different times would eventually give information to law enforcement. The first fellow inmate informant was Coleman Sharp, and this information was given to investigators prior to David Cote's trial starting. He shared a cell in F Block at the Citrus County Jail with David the year before trial. Sharp alleged that David Cote told him he got into an argument with a broad, and the first thing I want to point out is he said that word was David Cote's word, broad, and you will notice later that that word broad is brought up in both informants' testimony. So Sharp alleged that Cote told him he got in an argument with this broad that he knew, and then he stabbed her. According to Coleman Sharp, David Cote further told him that after stabbing her, he bent her over and, quote, cut her asshole out, and then had sex with her. According to Sharp, David went on to tell him that he left the victim's home and flagged down a Crystal River police officer. He also told Sharp that the knife he used had been found in his sister-in-law's car and that cops had the knife, but they couldn't prove that it was the knife. Sharp also mentioned that David said there was a boat involved and money owed in the dispute with the victim. Sharp said that David told him, I was going to show her who the hell was boss. For their part, the state offered 2 possible motives, the falling out over the boat and a possible robbery of money that Virginia may have had on her person, given her clothing was cut off of her. In his second interview, David mischaracterized the boat deal between Virginia and Leo, saying it was just between them.
Now let's get away from the crime scene a little bit and talk about an incident that has to do with a boat that's at your brother's house. I guess it's a fiberglass boat with a motor on it.
That well boat?
I think this one he purchased from Virginia?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have any knowledge of that transaction?
Yes, I knew he bought it.
Okay. Were you involved in that transaction, or was it just him?
No, it was just between him and her. I think he bought it for $900 or $1,000. I think he owes her $400 on it yet.
Okay. What type of payments was he supposed to make?
I don't even know.
What is your relationship with your brother? Are you fairly close, or does he just let you stay in the van there by the house, or?
Well, we're fairly close.
Fairly close.
When I first came down here, I stayed with him until I got working out.
You've been down here how long?
About 7 years.
During that 7 years, where have you worked?
Metal industry for 3.
The first 3 years you were here? Was that metal industry?
Well, the 3 years out of the first 4 I was here.
Okay.
And temporary jobs. I went out on the river for a while. I wasn't making enough money, so I went to where I'm at now, Lakeside.
On the river?
Crabbing.
Crabbing.
But I understood more about that situation when I got Leo's deposition prior to trial. Here's what he said during that deposition about that boat. Did you ever have any business dealings with Mrs. Lawson?
Yes.
And what was the nature of your business dealings?
Well, we were friends. I bought a boat off her.
Okay, and what kind of boat?
18-foot wellcraft.
Did you make payments on that, or?
Yes.
Did you eventually pay that off?
Yes.
To your knowledge, was David ever in business with Miss?
Yes.
Okay, and what was the nature of David's involvement with Miss?
Fishing. They had a fishing boat.
They were fishing partners?
Yeah.
Was that with the boat or a different boat than yours, or?
Yeah, it was with the boat, and I bought the boat.
Okay, the same boat that you...
Yes.
You bought the boat, and then they were in the fishing business using your boat?
No, I bought it off them after they broke up the partnership.
Okay, so their business relationship just...
It dissolved.
Stopped, okay, and then you bought the boat.
Yeah.
In their opening statements, Cote's defense attorney, Paul Hawks, argued that there was no scientific fact that linked David Cote to the crime. And he said police focused on David immediately, to the exclusion of anyone else. And I have to say, in the reports that I read, there wasn't a single other person of interest mentioned. but that might be because there was a trail of big, fat breadcrumbs leading directly to David Cote and his bloody clothes. And in fact, on the stand, Paget told the jury that he became the suspect when they found those bloody clothes in his van that he essentially lied about. One thing I did notice, and I am certain the jurors did too because the defense brought it up, is that at no time in Officer Kat Leota's initial statement did she ever say she noticed David Cote had changed clothing between the first and second times that she saw him that night. But on the stand, she said she had noticed he had changed his clothing. And I suspect that detail went into the reasonable doubt file, at least for one or two jurors. The defense also called a witness that had once been a roommate of a local named Paul, who said that this guy asked him if he wanted to help rob Virginia Lee Lawson. He testified that Paul was pretty crazy and collected knives, and that right after the murder he left town. Paul was called to the stand and he said, yeah, he used to know the victim. He mowed her lawn on occasion, and he had heard that she carried large sums of money, but he denied ever planning to rob her. They also called another neighbor, who told the jury that Virginia Lawson and David Cote were friends, which, to be fair, they were at one time, until this alleged business deal went wrong, and then there were bad feelings between them, according to other witnesses. All of these things help a jury get to reasonable doubt. And remember, no murder weapon was ever recovered, at least not one that they could say was the murder weapon. And also remember, we're talking about the 1980s. They weren't doing DNA testing. They were doing blood typing. David's saliva matched the blood type found on cigarette butts that were his preferred brand at the scene, and blood found on his clothes matched Lawson's blood type. That was the standard at the time. In the end, the jury of 7 men and 5 women deliberated for only 4.5 hours, and they came back with a verdict of not guilty. While prosecutors considered whether they wanted to reopen the investigation, that never really came to pass. At the time, they said,
The initial investigation and subsequent developments have not in any way swayed us from our original opinion that Mr. Cote was the responsible individual in that homicide.
David Cote moved back to Port Huron after the trial, and it wasn't until 1999, some 12 years after the homicide of Virginia Lee Lawson, that investigators would interview Donald Nichols, Jr. I got my hands on some Federal Bureau of Prisons documents on Nichols out of a Colorado federal prison where he was housed in one of many federal prisons where he still resides today. Nichols has been incarcerated for much of his life. He's been moved around the federal system, in fact, quite a bit because of disciplinary issues. His first offense was at the age of 8, burglary. He was charged with more burglaries at the age of 9. At 13, petty larceny, criminal mischief, and assault charges. At the age of 14, he had a plethora of cases, multiple grand larceny, multiple burglaries, and at 15, he added a couple motor vehicle thefts to the raft of other offenses. Nichols was 15 years old, he said, when he was first approached by a man calling himself Bill at the bowling alley where his mom worked. He describes essentially being groomed by this man, resulting in regular sex acts with him and supplying him with pot and other drugs. He did some time at the Dozier School for Boys, and if you are a regular listener, you'll recall what kind of place that was in my coverage of Larry Rougeau's case in Season 23. Suffice to say, Donald Nichols was a troubled kid and became a troubled adult and has spent his life incarcerated. He participated in a murder while in prison, and he is described as extremely violent, a high escape risk, and he's abused substances while incarcerated. Now, in the first interview that they did over the phone with Nichols, he gave a story that essentially inserted another person into the story in place of himself. He says because he was speaking with investigators while other inmates were nearby. I received 2 audio files of the 2 interviews he did, and the first one is almost completely inaudible. However, I do have the transcripts for both. Now, I want to preface this by saying that while the Federal Department of Corrections admits that their records for his juvenile offenses are incomplete, they did reference him being sent to the Dozier School for Boys on May 21, 1987, on an escape charge, and furloughed to his parents on September 10, 1987. Virginia Lee Lawson was killed on July 7, 1987. So if those dates were accurate, he could not have been present when she was killed. However, what I learned when I covered the Dozier School is that not only are the records woefully incomplete, and often when an inmate would escape in their care, those cases were not documented well or at all. That escape charge mentioned could reference an escape during the relevant time period. As he would tell these investigators at that time, he was out on ROR, quote, running around town. Nichols reached out to jail officials with a note for Citrus County law enforcement saying that he had some information about a robbery and a homicide, 2 different cases.
This is a interview with Mr. Nichols over the phone. I received a letter from the clerk's office yesterday, which would have been February 9th, 1999, that you allegedly sent them. Is that correct? Okay.
Because the audio in that first interview is unlistenable, I did a recreation based on the text from the transcript so you could hear it all.
Okay, like I said, it was in 1987. I said spring, but I'd say it was anywhere from May to August. Somewhere, in that area. So one night, this particular night, I had been partying with some friends of mine. We had been partying in Crystal River in a little housing project area. And, we'd been drinking and riding around and having a good time. And eventually I couldn't find anybody to give me a ride home. So I had somebody bring me to Highway 44. And I got out and started walking towards Lecanto to where my parents lived. And I guess it was after walking maybe 10 or 15 minutes or so, hitchhiking. A dark-colored van pulled over, asked me if I needed a ride, and I said yes, and I got in. And then there was two guys in the van. One was an older gentleman with short gray hair, grayish white hair with brown in it, and glasses. He said his name was William, but the other gentleman always referred to him as Bill. So in my letter to the clerk, I said William or Bill. So the other guy was a younger guy, dark black hair. He called himself Noah. And they picked me up and asked me where I was going, and I told them, the direction I was going. And they started that way. And we drove for a few minutes, and then they asked me if I wanted to, if I did LSD. And I, acid. And I said, yeah. And they said, do you want some paper, some blotter acid? And I said, yeah. And, they gave me 3 or 4 hits, I remember. I took that and we drove for a few more minutes heading towards my parents' house. And they said, well, hell, why don't you just come and party with us? We got this old broad, and basically, she's a freak and this and that. And, she'll do whatever we want. And I said, all right, I'm game. So we turned around and went the opposite direction. And we drove for a little while, and then we stopped at a convenience store and went inside and got some cigarettes, and we came back out. Maybe some cold drinks too, I'm not sure. But came back out and sat in the parking lot for at least 30 minutes, which, we sat there talking, and letting the acid peak, which it did, for me anyway. I should say. And then, I don't know really the direction we went when we left, but we drove for maybe 30 minutes, or 30 or 45 minutes, 30 minutes, until we arrived at this trailer. We arrived at this trailer, this little neighborhood where there was a little trailer. We pulled in. Bill told us to wait in the van, which we did. And there was a lady that came to the door of the trailer. Opened the door. Now that I'm talking about it, I seem to remember she was wearing some type of like a dress, like a house dress type thing. I don't know what you'd actually call it. It wasn't really like a dress. It was like a kind of a nightgown, I would say. I remember her standing in the door, and he went in for a few minutes and come back out. Well, didn't come back out. He came to the door and he waved us out. I just, I nodded to her as I came in. Bill introduced me. I sat out in the living room, and she got up and got Bill some type of refreshment, some type of drink, soda. It could have been beer, but I don't remember. I don't remember any alcohol, but it could have been beer. But I remember that she got some ice for it. Sat down, began to talk. Noah had turned his chair around, and him and I were talking, and the effects of LSD, were peaking. The high was getting really intense. So I really wasn't paying attention to what they were saying at that point. And next thing I know, the woman raised her voice, which caught my attention. I look over, and Bill's stood up, and then she got up, and he kind of grabbed her by the wrists, and said something to the effect of, I need to talk to you back here, and took her into the back bedroom. They went in and slammed the door. They were in there, and there was there was not really shouting, but there was some loud talking, and Noah and I didn't even pay attention to it. And then I heard her scream a few times, but when I say scream, I don't mean, like a agonized scream, just like a frustrated type scream. Um and then it was quiet for a few minutes, and then Bill opened up the door and called Noah into the bedroom, and they left the door. It wasn't, shut. The door was still open like halfway, and they went in there, and I was like, man, what the hell's going on? I'm sitting there. I was kind of freaked out about what was happening. Or at that point, when he called Noah in there, I could hear her mumbling something to the effects of like, stop it, leave me alone, please don't, stuff like that. And I'm wondering what the hell's going on here. And then Noah went to the back, and it's hard to describe this because I wasn't, I didn't see it, but I remember like a scuffling sound, and then she let out a big scream, and I stood up, and the living room, I was getting ready to go back there, but I didn't. And they slammed the door, and I heard her scream again, and it just, it got quiet, and I'm thinking to myself, hey, they're having some type of fight back there, or something's going on. So I sat back down, and I was real nervous, and I don't exactly know how much time passed, but it was a good amount of time, maybe 20 minutes. And there was like a light in the hallway, and then there was light in the living room itself. And when Bill came out of the bedroom, he turned off that hall light. It's like I heard the door open, and I looked at the hallway, and he stepped out of the room, and he came toward the sitting area, or the living room, excuse me, and he turned off the light real quick. So I really didn't get a good look at him. As he merged into the kitchen, I saw that he was naked, and his torso, his chest, and his legs and his genital area was just covered in blood, and the back of his hands, I remember. And he walked out, stood, I mean, directly in front of me and stared at me, and I remember there was an ashtray, and I'm trying to think if there was a table beside me or in front of me. There was a little table, I remember, kind of nonchalantly. I grabbed that ashtray. I was going to use it to hit him in the head because I didn't know what this damn dude was doing at this point. And I thought he was a homosexual or something, and he was going to try something, but he didn't say a word. He looked at me. I mean, at that point, then he looked at me. He said, turn off the lights, turn off all the fucking lights. And so I got up, and he said, take something and wipe off everything that we touched. He said, but don't touch it with your fingers, and I did it. I got up. I remember turning off a lamp, and I used my shirt that I was wearing. I had like a jersey type of shirt on to turn off the lamp, and the wipe those fingerprints off where I had switched the lamp off. And I remember turning off a couple light switches, one in the kitchen area and one in the living room area. And at that point, he walked back toward the bedroom, and I can't remember if he went in the bedroom, but I know he had on his underwear. That's all he was wearing. He opened up the door, and he looked out, and there was an outside light, and he turned it off, and he stepped out, and I remember thinking, what the hell is going on? And then Noah came out, and he was already almost dressed. He was pulling on his shirt, and things may have happened a little slower, a little faster. I'm just trying to relate them in a sequence, but um then Bill came right back in and he I don't know what type of gun it was, but he had an old type of shotgun looking gun. And honestly, I thought he was going to go in there and shoot the woman, at that point. But he didn't. He didn't go back toward the bedroom, and there was never any gunshot or anything. So I didn't hear the gunshots, and so he went as far as where the hallway was, and like set that gun down in the hallway and put on his clothes right there, and told me to go get in the van, and I did. I went and got in the van. A few minutes later, not very long, much longer, him and Noah came out. And as soon as we got in the van, he started it up, and he didn't turn on his lights, and he started the van up, and he turned back and looked at me. And I was sitting, in the back of the van, and he turned around and he looked at me right in the face, and he said, the same thing we did to her, we'll do it to you if you say a fucking word, and this and that. And he told me nobody would believe me, and he didn't touch anything, and Noah didn't touch anything, and he mean maybe thinking nobody would believe my story, basically. And if I was to try to tell the authorities what happened. But
Did he say how he killed her?
Well,
Or make reference to how?
yeah, he sure did. He told me, if I did say something, then they would do to me what they did to her. I can't remember the verbatim actually how it was said, but something about that they had cut her a new asshole, and that they would do the same to me, without a blink of an eye, that they would butcher me, and, like they butchered her.
Did you know either one of them to have a knife or anything like that, or a razor?
I didn't see a bloody knife or anything like that, if that's what you're asking.
Okay, so just by now you're in the van and they're in the van leaving the residence.
Okay, something else, this might be relevant, but I seem to remember, when a car pulls out, you hear like the sound of stones under the tires.
Yeah.
That sound. And it could be dirt, but it could be like gravel or something maybe. I seem to remember that as I'm discussing this with you, that's like the noise when we pulled out. It was like a, inside a smooth kind of sound.
Okay.
But that means I don't know, but if it helps anyway, I think that was, I think I recall that because the lights were off. We pulled out, and I think I remember we took a right and we drove for a few minutes, not minutes, but we drove for a little while, and we got to this, we eventually he turned on the lights, and I think we took another right, and I'm almost sure we took another right, and then we were on a road. And we drove until we got like to a main intersection, and that intersection is where like they told me to get out. And it's not very far from there to where this little convenience store is. From that intersection right there. A convenience store is just right down the road. And I got out and they drove off. And I went over and I made a phone call to a girl named Donna Mills, who I was friends with at the time, and she lived in Crystal River, and she came out and she picked me up, and I stayed the night with her that night. I never mentioned anything about it at all. Well, I mean, I have, but
Who all have you talked to about this?
I told one person in my life, and that was my grandfather.
Okay, what's his name?
His name is Mac Nichols.
Okay, and where does he live at?
Well, he's deceased now.
Okay.
He died he died in 93, but I saw him right before I was locked up in the bank robberies. I went up and, my grandfather's always, been more like a father to me than a grandfather. And, I told him the story, and I said, because, I'd been in trouble, at a young age. And I started getting in trouble when I was like 8. And I had just previously, got out of the boys' home,
But he's the only one that heard anything about this then.
yeah, he's the only one I've ever told anybody about this.
Okay. How long after this were you still in Citrus County?
See, to be honest, I can't remember if the Stokes flea market thing was before or after that.
Okay. You're talking about that burglary?
It was in the same, I'm almost positive it was in the same year.
Okay, but I mean, you didn't leave the area like the next couple weeks or anything after this?
Oh no, no. I'd gotten arrested for the burglary, and I was out on ROR and running around, and I was there for a while.
Okay, did you ever read about the homicide in the newspapers or anything? Did you ever see it on TV or anything after this happened?
No, but I mean, when you're out there 16 years old, drugging and, trying to catch anything wearing a skirt, you're not watching TV.
How old will you say this lady was?
I'm just guessing in her 50s. I mean, I wouldn't say even 40s. I would have to say 50s at least, but it could even be a little older.
You also said something to John that you thought maybe they had washed up in the sink or something.
Yeah, I said that. Bill had done that. I recall him washing his hands. Rinsing his hands, but as far as him washing up, no, I don't remember doing that, but I remember him turning on the sink and
Which sink are we talking about?
in the kitchen area.
Okay, so right off the bat, the clothing description does not match, but the mention of the man retrieving an old shotgun does. Also, you'll notice that there was another mention of cut her a new asshole, which again is pretty compelling and hard to imagine that someone pulled out of thin air. And in his interview, he mentioned having previously gotten out of the boys' home, which also matches with possibly him getting out of the Dozier School or escaping, because escape was mentioned in his Department of Corrections paperwork. Now I want you to listen to as much of the audio as I could provide of his second interview, which was also a little bad, but there were points where you could understand it. And in this interview, he admits to having inserted another person in place of himself when he first told the story because he did not want the other inmates nearby to essentially hear him confessing to what amounted to being present when someone was killed.
Why don't you start at the beginning and tell me approximately when that was, when this incident occurred, and how you got rattled that way?
My memory, I recall it being either in June or July of 1987. How I really met an older gentleman by the name of Bill, I never knew his last name. My mother used to work at a bowling alley in the Canto called Manatee Lane. And
for reference, this bowling alley that his mom worked at, Manatee Lanes, is about 3 miles from Virginia Lee Lawson's house, so about 2.5 miles from where David Cote was staying in his van on his brother's property.
I used to go up to the bowling alley. That's when I first met him. He used to be out there bowling. He'd be in the game room. I've seen him there a few times. This is months before the incident. Actually, quite a few months before when I first met him. I was probably 15 at the time when I first met him. Long story short, it turned into he started to approach me and to like get high, which I did. I was into that. What were you doing? Get high. Mostly liquor and marijuana. Sometimes, pills, different volumes, stuff like that. Acid, but mostly just marijuana and alcohol. But that went on and on, and I'd see him there and come over, and be honest, I don't know where you grew up or whatever. Man knows when getting kind of close to him.
He said, I don't know where you grow up, but a man knows when another man is getting kind of close to him, He said this man, calling himself Bill, offered to take him fishing one day.
And on the way back, point blank, cracked on me, give me oral sex, And to be honest, I let him do it. So
He wanted to give you oral sex.
Right. And, so I let him do it because God gave me, point blank. I was young, just a young teenager, didn't have any way to buy my own reefer and stuff. So, okay, I'll let him do it. So I let him do it. And then it became more of a, when can you meet me here, type of thing. Before it was, oh, there he is, how you doing?
He wanted to have a regular dating relationship.
Yeah, exactly. He wanted me to be a regular thing, and I really wasn't coming. That's the first time I ever did it, But, so I started meeting him, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe he came to where we did start traveling one time.
He described this man, who called himself Bill, coming to his house one day and telling his mom that he wanted Don to come help him with some work. And his mother was leery of this adult man showing interest in her son. So after that, he couldn't meet him at the bowling alley when she was working because she was always there, aside from about 2 days off a week. And on every other occasion but those days, they would have to meet outside.
Long story short, this guy started becoming more insistent. He never took me to his burglary dude. I think he lived in that general area somewhere. But around, let's see, May, I'd say May, maybe April, late April, May, it became almost every other day. Not the sex thing, but, he wanted to be with me and take me to go to the movie. That's when we started getting more into the acid and the pills, And it seemed to me, I've had years to look at this, he would try to get the most subdued that I could be, get relaxed, and go somewhere, pull off in the woods and marry.
So Don says that the man would ply him with drugs on a regular basis and then pull off into the woods and give him oral sex. And I want you to remember we're talking about a 15 or 16-year-old boy here. He said this man, calling himself Bill, was aware that he'd been in detention before, and he asked him if he had ever done any burglaries. Don told him that he had.
And anyway, the night he came and picked me up, I'm almost sure he picked me up at the bowling alley. Might not have been, but I'm pretty sure it was. We just drove around, went to park somewhere, got high, and basically he goes, I got a treat for you tonight. And I was like, what? And he goes, how'd you like to go over to somebody's house? It's just an older woman, a threesome type thing. What he proposed to me. I'm just, how old is she? He's like, it's about around my age or so,
Don describes the man asking if he wanted to go have a threesome with an older woman, and then he pulled into a convenience store, and they did some acid, as well as he recalled going in and buying some cigarettes, and maybe some soda.
I was so out of it by the time, these things actually happened. We drove for a little while. I remember pulling into a place, it was like, with house trailer type things here. And, she came to the door, I was standing there. She was wearing, what I remember, it wasn't like a nightie type thing, it was like a robe, more like it wasn't see-through or anything, so it wasn't like a negligee, it was like a house, I don't know what you call it, an older woman might wear. But it wasn't really like a nightgown, like something thicker, right? Okay, so, you could see her shoulders, so like a strap type thing, it wasn't a sleeve. We went in, and everything, seemed normal to me. Oh, I'm sorry. Before we actually got there, as we were driving, he said this might get, get a little hairy. He said, because if she's got some money, I'm going to take it. So, we get there, we go in. When I remember, they were sitting at a kitchen table. She was, like, had a hallway to her back, behind her. He was sitting on her right, in a kitchen chair. And I was further over on a small couch, love seat, whatever you call it. And I know he was smoking. I know she was smoking. Cigarettes? Yeah, it was a cigarette. And I believe he was smoking something known as a Camel or I was going to tell you what he was smoking about, so that's what I remember. And I was smoking Marlboro. There was a little table here in Nash, so we're sitting there, and he grabs her wrist, and I see that. She doesn't, get off me or anything, She just kind of like leans over forward. And I'm not stupid or anything, and it was quiet, but he said something, I don't know what he said. And she said, no, I don't want to do that, or something like that. And he just grabbed her up, she stood up, pushed her. And she really didn't know, she didn't try to hit him or anything. I remember her saying, what's the matter? Just calm down, sit down. He was cussing at me, He said, I fucking told you to get up. Well, he stood her up again. He looked at me, he said, lock the front door.
He says the man stands up again and screams at her to get up, and then orders Dawn to lock the door of the trailer, which causes her to freak out. The man then pulls her down the hallway to the bedroom.
Now she's not fighting, but, she's upset, get off, get out of my house, and this and this. And they do, they go in the room, bam, shuts the door. And I'm just sitting there, down. She screamed a couple of times. I mean, it wasn't an excruciating scream, just, get off me, that kind of shit. And it was quiet, So he opened the door, boom. All loud. You know, and I didn't run and look, you know. So I don't know at that point if she was half knocked out or she didn't run out of the room, you know. So I don't know if he just scared her and said stay here or what. As I'm like, now I'm standing right where the table is, looking directly down the hall, and he comes by. He kind of moves me out of the way. Oh, God, fucking way. You know, didn't say that, but he's like, move. So I moved out of the way.
So he says then the man comes out of the bedroom, goes to the kitchen, and starts rifling through the kitchen cabinets and drawers, looking for something. And then he returns to the bedroom. But the woman doesn't come out of the bedroom when he does this, which is odd from my perspective. A couple minutes pass and the woman is now screaming, he says, in earnest. Then the bedroom door opens and the man yells for Dawn to come into the room. Dawn enters and sees her on the bed and describes the man as being in between her thighs. He says her legs were not wide open, but the man's body was essentially holding her down. He said he didn't see any blood at that time.
She just said, no, please don't do this, please don't do this. No, so he looks at me, he said, here, hold her fucking arm. I said, no, man, I'm not going to do that.
Dawn says the man told him to hold her down, and he says, we're not going to rape her, asshole. And then he orders him to hold her down. And all the while, Virginia is begging this kid to not let the man do this.
I did, you know, I remember put her arms like this. Right, and I was just leaning on the bed, holding her down on her wrist.
So Virginia had contusions across her chest and both wrists that would be indicative of being held down.
I was 16 on for my size, so it wasn't nothing to hold down. No. I didn't see any blood or anything. She just lay there. You know? She kept telling me, don't let him do this, don't let him do this. Well, then he went and going through drawers and stuff.
Dawn says as he's holding her down, the man's looking around the room and opening up drawers, and then he lifted up the side of the mattress and he found an envelope. He said there was money in the envelope.
If I'm holding her hand, let's say these are her wrists, the body's going this way. If I'm kind of turned a little bit, I mean, my back isn't turned. I'm kind of turned a little bit. When I look like this.
Dawn says he turned slightly, and that's when he first sees the knife, which he describes as long and thin, a fillet knife. It was never released to the public that the type of knife that police were looking for was a fillet knife, or that they had found a fillet knife on Heidi Keith's dashboard in the truck the day Virginia Lawson was found.
I don't know what kind of knife you guys call it, but it's not the kind with the teeth on it. It's the kind that's like long, real long, like thin, the real sharp thin type, you know what I'm talking about?
Like a stiletto type knife, or sharp on both sides?
No, it's like...
Or like a steak knife, it's not...
It's kind of like a steak... It's not a steak knife, it's kind of like a steak knife, but it's like a... I think the name is a fillet knife. It's a fillet type knife. It's sharp, real sharp.
Dawn said, he struck her, somewhere in here, and then the transcript indicates he points to his abdomen. The autopsy report indicates that Virginia Lawson was stabbed in the right abdomen.
You know, he told her, where's the rest of the money? She said, there isn't any. He says, well, where's your purse? She's like, I think it's over here. But he got up and he actually left the bedroom. I think she said, whatever's in there, that's what matters. And for some reason, he believed there was more money there. And I don't exactly know where he stuck the knife. He stuck her somewhere. I didn't hear it. Serious.
Real rapid.
And, she screamed and he punched her a couple times. Not in the face, but like in the body. Not so much whack, but like, bitch, tell me. Like that.
Dawn said that the man punched her, quote, where her breasts are. And the autopsy report indicates that Virginia Lawson had 2 deep abrasions above and below her right breast and contusions below her left breast.
After a few minutes of that, kind of told me let her go. So I let her go. And I let her go, started to get up. And which, didn't bother me. We pushed her back and kind of pushed me out of the room.
Did she run into the way?
Not that I recall.
She went in the living room and laid up on the couch?
I don't remember that. If that happened, I don't remember.
The investigator asks if she ran into the living room, obviously because there's a bunch of blood on the couch and the wall behind the couch, and that's where Virginia was found.
The only thing I remember is she pushed me out of the room. Like I said, when I let go of her hands, she sat up. And, that's when she started to fight, to be honest with you. But he didn't want me, over anyway, so let her go, and he kind of pushed me to shut the door, and I was out of there.
So far, Don has only described the stab in the abdomen, which would be the only injury that would be causing blood at this point based on his story. However, there were other wounds on the front side of Virginia's body that would have been bleeding if she had been in the bedroom when they occurred. First of all of the defensive wounds on the fingers and palms of both of her hands. She also had a 3-centimeter stab wound on her forehead. Then there were the stab wounds on her neck. So Don has accounted for seeing what the ME labeled as stab wound number 4, but not numbers 1 through 3.
She had blood, seemed to me, like from here down.
From her breast down?
Seemed to me, so when I actually went back. You say this, she run in the room. I don't know how she could have. I mean, if she did, beats the hell out of me. I didn't see it.
Well, no, I'm asking. I mean, if it all happened in that room and the other rooms, I'm really about the case. That's why I'm asking, just to jog your memory. So you say you left the room, you went down the hallway, you heard all kinds of banging around. And you said when you went back, she had blood from her chest down. Did you go back to the room after the fight down? Did he come out?
He describes being pushed out of the room, and at that point he heard bang, clang, boom, bang, and he assumed they were struggling. He said he didn't know where her wounds were, but at this point he indicated seeing blood from her breasts down.
He actually came out completely. Came out of that room. Just he stripped down. I mean, I don't know if he had sex with her or if that occurred or what. I don't know. I know he had blood on. Not just speckled with blood. I mean, hands drenched in blood.
He said after the banging and after a few minutes of quiet, the man came out of the room completely naked and covered in blood. He said he had blood on his hands from the wrists down, drenched in blood, blood on his torso, smeared, blood in his pubic area, and smeared on one leg. And it was at that point that he worried about being killed himself.
I don't know if there's footprints, what I don't remember, but I know he walked out where the kitchen was. He told me, he said, I want you to take off your shirt. He said, and wipe down everything that he touched. Pretty calmly, it's just some more talking, wasn't excited. He said, turn off that. He told me to turn off the light. I did that. Turn off the light. The light, he said, take your time, wipe down everything he touched. And he even said something about a cigarette. I know I didn't touch him, so I know I didn't remove anything like that.
The man very calmly told him to take off his shirt and wipe down everything he touched, turn out the lights, and then he went back to the bedroom. Don said, I'm not going to lie, I figured that lady was dead. She wasn't screaming. Anybody bleeding like that is either dying or they're dead. So he thought to himself to get out of this, he was going to let this dude think everything was okay, and then get the hell away from him. He said the man went outside and he got a pair of shorts from his van.
So all he had on was barefooted shorts, and a nylon shirt. When he came back in, he had it was an old gun. I mean, you could tell it wasn't anything modern, old, long pistol or a short type shot. I don't know what the hell it was. And he didn't threaten me with it or anything, but he came in with it. And I want to say, I can't honestly, 100%, I want to say he took the knife with him. I don't know. Maybe he did throw it down, but I seem to remember him having it. He went outside. I think when he definitely had it with him, I said, give me your shirt. So I get my shirt. He said, go wait out in the van. Go sit outside. So I did. I went out, got in the van. He was only in there for just maybe 5 minutes. Came out right after. And when he was on his way out, wiped off the door, came on the inside, shut the door, wiped off the door, came outside. That was it. Shut the door, got in the van. As we were driving, it wasn't very far. He goes, this is what he told me. He says, it doesn't matter, if you stabbed her or whatever or not. He said, you're part of it. And he's talking to me like that, And remember, I'm high through this whole thing, too. So it enhances all kind of shit,
Then he said the man sent him outside to wait in the van. He thought it was maybe 5 minutes or so, but as you've heard, nowhere in this retelling of events is Virginia Lawson anywhere but the bedroom.
Basically what he was telling me. And then he told me, said, he goes, if you do say anything, he said, I'll cut you a new asshole just like I did her. That's exactly what he told. Basically told me about the homosexual thing. He said, if you do, all this shit's gonna come out. Parents are gonna know what we've been doing. Stuff like that. And we didn't drive very far. He said, I need you to get out here.
The man drops Don off at this little intersection where a convenience store is visible nearby, lit up in the night, and he gives him a few bucks. He thought 20 or 30 bucks. And he tells him to call someone to get him, but to keep his mouth shut. Don told investigators that he called his friend Donna Mills, and she picked him up. He said he stayed the night at her house, and he never told anyone except his grandfather, who was already deceased by the time investigators spoke with him.
He let you off. Did you ever see him again after that? Never saw him again after that. You never saw him at the bowling alley?
No, but
Don says he left the state shortly after that. He went to Clearwater with his brother, and then out of state shortly thereafter. He did that intentionally, he said. He didn't want to be around the area after that.
I had intentionally left, I didn't want to be around, because of that, but
right.
I was running from it, And, to be honest, after some time, I never heard nothing, I've heard nothing about it, I know somebody had to find it. I mean, sooner or later, just odd. Right. Somebody had to find her. So I never heard anything. Well, my parents moved from McCanto to Dunellen. They didn't live in that area anymore. So I wasn't around that area anymore.
The investigator asks him if there's anything else he wants to tell them, and he says no. They ask him point blank, did you participate in cutting her? He said absolutely not. He just held her down. So they conclude the interview, they go off tape, and he consents to one of those voice stress tests, after which they go back on the record.
Restart the tape, 6:30:99 at 9:13 hours. Donald, you voluntarily just submitted to a computerized voice stress analysis. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And after the completion of the test, we were talking again, and I asked you if you, a female, participated in it. Can you tell me what you said to me at that point?
What I did say the first time?
Yes.
You said that my answer showed some stress and asked me why would that be, and I said, you asked me if I was truthful, and I said no, that I had done other things, and I told you that.
What other things did you do? What kind of stuff?
At one point, I had choked her, squeezed my hand down her throat, and told her to grab my penis.
At one point, I choked her, squeezed my hand down on her throat, and told her to grab my penis, and she did. They asked him if he had his pants off or on, and he said his pants were on, and it was through his jeans.
After she did that, did you at any other time exert any physical force on her? Did you hit her or choke her? Did you fondle her body? Did you cut her in any way? What other things did you do?
I just held her down with.
The transcript says, held her down with, only force was holding her hands down, while during that one time I said he cut her, that he poked her, stabbed her, however you want to, I was holding her when he did that one. Then they asked him if he held her down while the man cut her in any other way.
Or while he cut her in any other way?
I only seen him do it one time. That was in this area here, like lower stomach.
Pubic area?
That's the only time. And it was, to me, I didn't even see it go in it since I knew he did it. Just screamed and, he pulled out. I could see the blood right there. I don't know. I can't say if it was a gash or a slice.
The sentence in the transcript goes further. I can't say if it was a gash or a slice, because I was kind of turned to the side when he did it. I looked, and it was like his hand was in motion, I think. I don't know, but I didn't see him cut her or stab her.
Did you all ever move anywhere else in the house with her, bring her anywhere else in the house with you?
I didn't know.
So there's nothing else, we'll go ahead and put the interview now. 6:30:99 at 9:16 hours.
Buried in the report, I found a couple of paragraphs where investigators spoke to a girl Dawn's age at the time, named Stephanie, who had called police with information that a guy named Dominic had told her that someone had been present and watched Virginia Lee Lawson be killed. Dominic was another 16-year-old local kid who lived on a road behind Virginia Lawson. But when they went and asked him about it, they said Dominic appeared to be very nervous, but he denied having any knowledge about the Lawson murder. He did say that he was acquainted with the entire Cote family, though. Now, a quick jaunt on the county website suggests that Dominic has his own rap sheet, and he was busy offending around that time as well. He was certainly a frequent flyer in the Citrus County court system in the 80s and 90s. Point being, it's not unreasonable to assume that a couple of teens who were getting in trouble regularly around that time, who both lived in the same general area, may have moved in the same circles. Donald said he didn't tell anyone but his grandfather, but he was a 15 or 16-year-old kid, well on his way to being a lifelong criminal. And he also said he was very high on LSD and pot when the incident occurred. Who knows what he could have said to his peers before he decided to skip town. It would certainly be a pretty big coincidence if 2 months after the homicide, a teenaged witness, Stephanie, contacts police to say she heard someone say that he heard someone watched Virginia Lawson be killed, and then 12 years later, someone comes forward to essentially say just that, with quite a few details that match the crime scene and victims' injuries thrown into the mix. After Cote was acquitted, this case never really went anywhere else, and that's because police believed David Cote was responsible for the murder of Virginia Lee Lawson. They said as much to reporters. I want to talk to you about that other alleged murder, the Indian male from Canada that David Cote's family members and associates mentioned that he had told them he had done. But the incident about the Indian male was not investigated thoroughly enough. And they did have an incident to look at the time, but it occurred in 1978, not 1975, when David Cote's ex-wife said that she saw all that blood in her car on that morning that they took their son to a children's hospital for a procedure. She was interviewed about this incident 12 years after it had occurred, allegedly. Her memory anchor was that trip to take the child to the hospital. Now, on its face, that does feel like a pretty strong memory anchor. But when I dig into the summary of her account and compare it with the summary of her sister-in-law's account of the same incidents, they both describe a situation where David comes home drunk or drugged, pulls a gun on them, and then forces his ex-wife to load his belongings into his van while he holds them at gunpoint. He tells them he's leaving, and he's in a hurry. And already, right off the bat, that sounds sketchy. Why are you suddenly around 2 a.m. needing to get the hell out of Dodge? What exactly precipitated that? Another important detail, Leo's ex-wife, Dawn's mom, worked at the Active Bar, formerly called Fred's. She told investigators that sometime around the incident when he had threatened her and the ex-wife with the gun, after which David's ex-wife said that he left town and she filed for divorce the first time, David Cote told her that he had killed a man and disposed of the body in a wooded area near Port Huron. That event with the gun appears to have been later in the timeline in 1975. When David's ex believes she saw the blood in the vehicle. So is it possible that she could be mistaken about the time frame of these events? Is it possible that 12 years later, when she is speaking to police about these incidents, she's conflating the two? When he told his sister-in-law about murdering that Indian male, Leo's ex said she watched the newspaper for a while to see if a body was recovered, but she didn't see anything in the news. I scoured newspapers.com and I didn't find a single article on the body that was found in 1978 either. David had told Leo's ex that he had killed the Indian male with a knife, and he'd been giving him a ride home when he killed him. He told others that he picked him up at the Active Bar. When investigators in Citrus County spoke with Macomb County Sheriff's Office in Michigan during the Virginia Lawson homicide investigation, they asked if Macomb County had any cases that resembled what they had been told had occurred with the Indian male. Macomb County was the neighboring county to St. Clair County, and they did locate a report from June of 1978 detailing the death of an Indian on I-94. Now, this information was in the Virginia Lawson file from 1987, and the excerpt reads, "The report stated the Indian's body was recovered in a decomposed condition. However, the death appeared to be natural. The time frame of that particular incident does not coincide with the time frame during which Cote allegedly killed the Indian." Because my policy is trust but verify, I got the report from Macomb County because I wanted to check for myself. On June 7, 1978, a body was found by employees of the Macomb County Road Commission, who were out picking up trash on the side of the road. The body was found on the westbound lane of I-94, 1 mile west of the New Haven Road overpass in Chesterfield Township. The body was described as lying on his right side, approximately 5 feet from the west edge of the blacktop shoulder in the tall grass and weeds just off the blacktop. He was wearing work pants and a Levi-type jacket, plaid shirt, long underwear, and tan socks and loafers. His body was described as being in an advanced state of decomposition. Just off the initial observation, the medical examiner thought that the body had been dead for about a week, but he saw no signs of foul play. They did have the victim's wallet, and they were able to identify him as Calvin Russell Sue. His last name is spelled S-A-U-L-T. And right off the bat, I want you to know that Calvin Russell Sue was an Indigenous male from Canada. He was born in 1915 at the Sixth Nation Reserve at Hagersville, Ontario, Canada, a member of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. So obviously, this individual would fit the bill as an Indian male from Canada. They found 2 $1 bills in his wallet, his Ontario birth certificate card, a couple of Michigan Department of Social Services medical authorization forms, his bank ID, and a Royal Oak, Michigan library card. The autopsy was ordered, and immediately the investigators tracked down Mr. Sue's brother. Joseph Clifford Sue said his brother was known as Russ, and he had last seen him on Wednesday, May 31st, 1978, about a week before he was found. His brother told investigators that Russ had gone to the Motor City bowling alley and bar to make a phone call, to who he did not know, and he returned home with a young man who was driving a blue 1977 Ford panel van. He said Russ, who was in his 60s, and the young man were drinking beer in the garage and discussing some chrome wheels that Russ was selling. This man was interested in them for his new van. Russ then left with the young man, and his brother never saw him again. Russ's brother describes the young man as tall, maybe 6'6", blonde hair and a small mustache. He said he saw a baby's high chair in the van, and paneling was being applied to the interior walls. So the investigator went to the Motor City bar and bowling alley and spoke to Karen, the barmaid. She knew Russ very well, because he had been barred from drinking in the bar, because it was his habit to endlessly pester the customers, according to her, until they would leave. However, he still came in regularly to cash his Social Security check, and he would eat in the restaurant there. Karen recalled that Russ had been there about a week earlier, sometime after 1 p.m., and he had struck up a conversation with a patron who she said was not a regular. And during that conversation, Karen overheard Russ say that he had 4 new wheels and some tires to sell that would fit the patron's new Ford van. Shortly thereafter, the men both left. Karen's description is a bit different. She said the man was tall and thin, but only around 5'11", with light brown hair, and she said he had a southern accent. She also thought he had a possible front tooth missing in his upper jaw, or a wide space between his 2 front teeth. She said he mentioned he was employed at Chrysler's. At the end of the interview, the investigator told Karen to keep an eye out for that patron, and if he came back, to give them a call. It was only about an hour later that Karen called police and said that the man had come in, and the first thing he asked was if she had seen Russ. Karen told him no. He told Karen that he had taken Russ to Port Huron, and that they had been in a bar. At 1 a.m., he said he was going to leave, and he discovered that Russ was nowhere around, so he left without him. He'd since gone on vacation in Tennessee, he told her. He also said that he was employed at the 8 Mile stamping plant, and he mentioned to her that he was driving his wife's 1967 Chevy two-door. Karen got the license plate. They ran that plate, and I would like to tell you who it was registered to, but that part of the report is redacted. So was the witness's address and driver's license number and name, although whoever did the redacting missed his name once in the report, so I can tell you that his name was William Edward Miller. I admit when I read that I felt a little nauseous because, by that time, I knew that the 16-year-old who says that he was with David Cote when he murdered a woman said that that man who sexually groomed him and invited him to her house that night went by the name William or Bill. That was the first suspicious data point to crop up. The man meeting this victim in a bowling alley where the 16-year-old first met his William was a second suspicious data point. Another pattern I noticed is that this meeting is again at the first of the month, right around the time that Russ might have been cashing his Social Security check at the bowling alley, where the barmaid said that he did just that regularly. Karen's description of this William having either a front tooth gap or upper tooth missing sent me on a little task, checking into whether David Cote had a tooth gap or a missing tooth, and I found what I was looking for on the arrest warrant paperwork in Virginia Lawson's report. In the area where you mark different facial characteristics, next to teeth was marked code 02, the code for missing or broken. That is another possible data point. The Macomb County investigator spoke to this William Edward Miller, who said that he had a wife named Kathleen, a son named William Jr., and a stepson named James. So, William Edward Miller tells police he met someone named Russ around 2:30 p.m. on Wednesday, May 31st at the Motor City Bar and Bowling Lanes on 8 Mile Road in Warren, Michigan. He said that Russ had some tires for sale, and he lived a few streets down from the bowling alley, so they went over there to his house, and William agreed to buy the tires and wheels. He didn't have the money with him, so he said he and Russ went to his bank, Mount Clemens Savings at 23 Mile and Gradient. He said he withdrew the money and he gave it to Russ. Next, William says Russ wanted to go to a bar on Gradient Avenue in Bell River for a drink, and he agreed. He told police that day he was driving his silver 1977 Ford van. And you will recall that Russ's brother said the van was blue, not silver. William said they got to the bar around 4 in the afternoon, and after several drinks they decided to go to another bar to play pool. Eventually, he said they went to a third bar in Port Huron, which he said was possibly called Fred's Bar. I want to mention that this third bar is about an hour away from Russ's house and the bowling alley where the two men met, and they've now been drinking for a few hours. The investigators asked him why they decided to go that far, and the man said Russ wanted to go there because he had lived in Port Huron before. I found his recollection of the bar name interesting because where they actually would have been was the active bar, which was formerly called Fred's years earlier. So it's interesting that William, who lived an hour away and gave no previous association with Port Huron, would know the former name of the bar. He says that they arrived at this bar around 10:30 p.m. They've now been drinking about 6 hours. He said after a while, Russ wandered off and was talking and drinking with other patrons. Around 1 a.m., according to William, on June 1st, he said he decided to leave, but he wasn't able to find Russ, so he just left, assuming that Russ got a ride home with someone else, or walked to a friend's house. And maybe he did. Maybe William Edward Williams was William Edward Williams, and maybe David Cote was in the bar that night too, and maybe he gave Russ a ride home. He did frequent that bar. His sister-in-law worked there. I'm guessing that police didn't take this investigation much further because they got back the medical examiner's report. Dr. Werner Spitz, a name I am certain anyone listening would have heard, performed Russ's autopsy. He determined that the deceased had no bone fractures, and he completely x-rayed the body. He said there was no indication of a vehicle bumper injury, as if he had been struck by a vehicle. Spitz said that Russ was in the advanced stages of tuberculosis, and he had the liver of an alcoholic. He was generally in poor health. He did note, however, that his heart, lungs, and some internal organs were completely gone. He indicated due to animal activity. He also noted that some of the victim's ribs were displaced, also supporting that, and the body was in an advanced state of putrefaction. The head and chest were nearly completely skeletonized, and only shreds of soft tissue and parts of arteriosclerotic aorta were noted. However, the lower extremities and pelvic area were relatively well preserved. Werner Spitz said that there were no injuries of any kind that were determinable, so he listed the death as due to natural causes. So I was wondering if Russ had gotten his throat cut. Would the autopsy have been able to determine that with what was found, as described by Dr. Spitz? Initially, Dr. Spitz had placed a hold on Russ's body until he, quote,
is completely satisfied the death was in fact the result of natural causes,
because he saw no signs of obvious foul play. He also had no other information from law enforcement to go on other than what he had found, which was a very decomposed body, with the area that we would want to know about almost completely skeletonized, possibly making it impossible to determine whether a throat slit injury had occurred or not. The only thing I want to add is that there was a diagram made by the first responders that showed Russ's position on the road when he was found. He was literally laying right off the blacktop, his head and feet in the position that you would expect him to be if someone had stopped a vehicle and rolled or pushed him out of their car and then drove off. While I understand that the victim was in poor health, it's hard to imagine he just suddenly dropped to the ground and died where he was found, of natural causes. Where he was found, by the way, was about halfway between Port Huron and his home. Russ definitely had not walked from the active bar at 708 Lapeer Road in Port Huron to the area near the New Haven Road Bridge in Chesterfield. That's 30 miles. Someone had him in their vehicle, and someone left him at least a half an hour away from home. And since he had made it back that far in that direction, it is certainly possible that something did happen to him on the way to take Russ home. Because to me there is no reasonable explanation for him being found where he was, other than someone leaving him there. I wish they had investigated that case more, maybe gone to the active bar, formerly Fred's, and spoken with the employees. Had they done so, they might have encountered David Cote's sister-in-law, who knew the story of the Indian male her brother-in-law said he had killed. Just as the state alluded to in their opening statement, there are missing pieces to this story, and that's probably why David Cote was acquitted, because there were still questions at that time that the jury felt needed answering. Even now, with more information, with Donald coming forward with his story about his part in the murder of Virginia Lawson, there are quite a few instances where his story doesn't fit. What he described the woman wearing that night. He also described everything happening in the bedroom, but she was found in the living room, where he said that nothing he was present for occurred, and the reports suggest an assault on that couch, unless that is something that occurred after the man ordered Donald to wait in the van. And speaking of the van, if David Cote's van was not even operable, what van was he driving that night? Even if Donald was remembering the wrong vehicle, because he said that he and David did spend a lot of time together, and he was often in a van with him, they would still have to have been driving a vehicle that night for it to have gone down like he described. So what vehicle would David Cote have been driving? In his deposition, Leo Cote said David's van had never been operable, and he had had it for 3 or 4 years. There was no tag on it, according to the documents. In Leo's first interview, the morning Virginia was found, when he told police he had been at Virginia's around 11 p.m. the night before, he told them he had given Virginia $100 payment for the boat. And in the state's opening statement, we learned that 5 crisp $20 bills were found in a bank envelope at the bottom of Virginia's purse. If that was Leo's payment, because as he testified he had just gotten paid, that might explain why Virginia might give Leo the registration, but it also begs the question why that money hadn't been found by the perpetrator. It made me think of that 16-year-old who said he was groomed by a man calling himself William or Bill at the scene of Virginia's killing, screaming to her,
"I know there's more, where is it?"
as he hunted around for money in her home. Obviously, we have to take into account that Donald was high, according to him, and his retelling was about 12 years after the incident. But there are quite a few details that it is hard to understand how he would know without being present. The ashtray that he mentioned, that the state also mentioned in the opening statements. The injuries that he described that he shouldn't have known. The stab in the abdomen, injuries to her chest and wrists indicative of being held down, the whole cut her a new asshole stuff, where on his body he described a naked Cote had been covered in blood, which would fit if he sexually assaulted Virginia after the knife assault, as he told another inmate he had. David mentioned in his first interview with Citrus County investigators that Virginia kept her money in a little plastic bag. He specified plastic. In fact, he was the only one of the witnesses who described the various bags that Virginia would use and put inside her bra or her pocket as plastic. Every other witness described a fabric of some sort. And I found it interesting that David said plastic because the day that Virginia was discovered, when David was standing there on the porch with Cat Leota's boyfriend and another officer, as the first responders were inside the scene, Cat Leota's statement says this.
Observed on the porch a small plastic baggie lying on the porch. There was also some type of elastic-type cloth band. I asked Dave at that point if that looked like the bag she kept her money in. He stated it could be, although it looked a little big.
So, they find a little plastic bag with a cloth band around it just outside her door on the porch, and it was taken into evidence. A bag that could have once had money in it and been discarded by the perpetrator if he had found it containing money on Virginia Lawson's person after he cut her clothing off. There were a lot of things that fit, and a lot of missing pieces or things that didn't. And after going through all of it, you get a sense of why both cases fell apart. Another observation, what Joyce told investigators about that little bag that Virginia had made her to keep her money in after she cashed her check.
She made me one that was white. I don't know what color she had. She taught me to do the same thing, because when I got my checks, so that nobody would take my money, she made me one. So that's how come I knew. She says I carry it here or there. It does make you consider the lengths to which these women went to hide their money, and why they felt they needed to do that. Why Virginia specifically thought that Joyce needed one of those bags for herself. Maybe it was something to do with the company that they often found themselves in. David Cote, knowing Virginia kept money on her person, literally telling law enforcement he knew that at the scene, is another strong tell in this case. He was no doubt aware of the incomes of these women, because both had given him money. He had ingratiated himself with both of them, and he was eventually someone Virginia wanted nothing to do with. Also, that weekend leading up to July 4th, right before Virginia's murder, right after she would have had her check, Joyce told police that she had only loaned David $5, and that's all he had asked for. But another one of those male witnesses that was hanging around that weekend said that he overheard David ask Joyce for $60 or $80. And just so we're clear on the locations here, David Cote had his brother Leo bring him to a convenience store near where Joyce lived at that point that weekend, and that was 25 miles away where he lived in Crystal River, probably because he knew he would get money out of her that weekend, and that he could probably bunk on her couch there too. That place where Joyce was that weekend wasn't nearby where Virginia lived, or where she had lived. By this point, she was in that trailer on Howard Agee's property, where Kelly would eventually find her mother ill right before she went to the hospital and then shortly thereafter pass away. 25 miles away, where she may have even moved to get out of Crystal River. Maybe she was trying to get away from that man who lived in a van on his brother's property. As for Mate Crawford, Kelly felt that that bar restaurant that they'd been to that weekend was in Ozello, and she knew that that group had spent time out there. In one news article it said, quote,
Irene Simmons, manager at Palm's Tavern and Restaurant, about 1 mile from where Crawford was found, said that she didn't think the incident would hurt business.
Stephanie's mom Phyllis had told police that Joyce told her the bartender from the Crystal Lounge had taken Mate to Palm's bar. How would she know that? Did someone tell Joyce that? If not, how would she have known it if she left the bar before Mate? In a Tampa Tribune article in 1992, 6 years after Mate's homicide, police said, quote,
They were unable to determine where Crawford had been or whom he had been with in the days or weeks before his death.
That sounds to me like the information that they did have was inconsistent at best. Police never interviewed Kelly, Joyce's daughter, but she did know all these people and she lived with Mate Crawford. Perhaps if she had been interviewed in Mate's case, she could have provided police with information that might have helped steer their investigation in the right direction. Information like what that fight between her mom and Mate was really about that night. Mate taking off with their rent money. That's certainly more information than police ever had related to a possible motive. I asked Kelly if she thought Mate was the type to sponge off her mom like the others, and she said no, she thought it was the opposite, that he participated in keeping their little family afloat. So I wondered if he took that money from Joyce so that no one else could get their hands on it that night, because Joyce seemed to be as light a touch as Virginia was known to be, and there was certainly no shortage of men, in both of their lives, ready to take a handout from them. If you have any information about the murder of Mate Crawford, you can contact Crime Stoppers at 1-888-ANY-TIPS, 1-888-269-8477, or you can contact the Citrus County Sheriff's Office Major Crimes Unit at 352-249-2790. As always, you can email me your thoughts, concerns, or tips at deckerjenny@gmail.com.